For 12 years they kept him in the gray. They didn't teach him, they watched him, the way you watch a puppy with 3 legs. Because the crystal ball, under Zammer's gaze, revealed something no one had ever seen before. 0. And it was precisely that 0 that made him more dangerous than any mage in the world. Now let's rewind. Darkness. Light. Pain tears through every cell. Ethan opens his eyes wide and sees a vault of dark stone inscribed with shimmering symbols. He tries to breathe and freezes. His chest feels foreign. His arms are short. His fingers are soft. He's lying on the icy floor of a huge hall. Dozens of children stand around him. They're all about 7 years old. He looks at his palms. They're a child's. He clenches his fists. His muscles won't obey him. The last thing he remembers is the steering wheel, the bridge, heavy eyelids, a blow. And now he stands barefoot in a child's body beneath a ceiling adorned with symbols. A woman in a silver robe walks down the row. In her hand is a crystal ball the size of an apple. She holds it up to each child. The ball flashes, where it's brighter, where it's dimmer. Behind her, someone is writing down a number. 42, 51, 38, 69. One boy registers 83 and the hall gasps. The woman smiles. The boy is led away to the adults in rich clothing. Ethan stands second to last and takes it all in. His brain is working at full capacity. He doesn't understand where he is or why he's 7 again, but he knows how to observe. The orb reacts to whatever inside the children. The higher the number, the brighter the flash. The number decides their fate. A high number means warm hands on their shoulders. A low number means pursed lips and a step to the side. A sorting system. He's seen this before. Not with children, with samples. The laboratory. A spectrometer. A beam of light. A number on the screen. Fit or unfit. Only here do they sort the living. A woman approaches. She leans in. She holds out the sphere. The cold of the crystal touches his skin, and nothing else. The sphere is dead. No flashes, no sparks. The woman frowns. She turns the sphere, brings it closer. Empty. She calls to the man behind her. He takes the sphere, checks it, holds it up to the child next to her. The sphere flashes. 26. She returns it to Ethan. 0. Is the artifact working? Someone asks. It's working, she replies. There's just nothing there. She looks at him with a mixture of disgust and pity. That's how people look at a cripple. 0 pulses, she blurts out. For the first time in Zammer's history. The hall falls silent. Everyone stares at him. And Ethan thinks. Not about what happened. He thinks about the sphere, its crystalline structure. It captures an internal energy source. It outputs a number, calibrated to a specific range. All the children have what the sphere detects. He doesn't. Either he really is at 0, or the sphere simply isn't tuned to what's inside him. The second option is more interesting. But there's not enough data. For now, let's go with the first. They lead him aside, not to the strong, not to the weak. Separately, alone. They give him a gray shirt instead of a white one. No one puts a hand on his shoulder. For 12 years he has lived at the Leaf Spire Academy. 12 years in gray. They let him attend lectures because the director wants to observe the anomaly. He can sit there. He can't practice. Not that he could anyway. He has no mana. But he listens. Every word. And he takes notes. The instructor insists that a fireball is an expression of the soul's passion. Ethan writes down something else. Temperature around 1,000 degrees. Diameter 30 centimeters. Lasts 4 seconds. Burns in the air without fuel. So either the fuel is invisible or the oxidizer is drawn from the air. Need to check. The instructor insists that an icy spear is the breath of winter in a mage's blood. Ethan takes notes. Hexagonal structure. Forms in 1.5 seconds. Feels like -40 to the touch. Travels 20 meters per second. Weighs 2 kilograms. Where does the water come from? From the air. After every ice spell, the hall feels drier. Note that. The instructor insists that lightning is the wrath of the heavens. Ethan takes notes. The plasma channel is nearly 20,000 degrees. The discharge is 4 meters long. It lasts 3/10 of a second. It doesn't travel in a straight line. It follows the path of least resistance, just like real lightning. Place a conductor between the mage and the target, and the discharge will flow through it. Can't test it yet. 12 years, 12 notebooks, each one filled to the last page. Formulas, tables, diagrams, hundreds of measurements taken on the sly. Distances by steps, temperatures by touch, time by pulse, angles by eye and through trigonometry. Not a single mage in Erden in 2,000 years has asked why fire burns. They know how to create it. That's enough for them. Ethan asks every day. And in his 13th year, they kick him out. The official reason? Failure to demonstrate even a basic spark. Dekan Karan Vale signs the order personally. Tall, gray-haired, the face of a man who never doubted a thing. He looks at Ethan over the sheet of paper and mutters that the Academy has given him more chances than anyone deserves, that 12 years of patience is an act of mercy, and that it's time to accept his nature. Ethan nods. He takes the paper, folds it, hides it in his pocket. Not a single muscle twitches. Vile expects tears or anger. Ethan gives him nothing. He stands on the steps of the spire with a single suitcase. The morning is bitterly cold. The wind carries the scent of wet stone. Behind him are the Academy's towers. Ahead lies the road down to the ports. Ethan adjusts his glasses. It's the only thing he's managed to beg from the glassblower in 12 years. He opens the suitcase. 12 notebooks, a change of clothes, 3 silver coins, a pocket knife, a candle stub, and he thinks, calmly and precisely. A fireball at 1,000 degrees is combustion, and combustion requires an oxidizer. Mages say they create it out of nothing, but it burns. So either they're lying to themselves about nothing, or magic draws oxygen from the air, and in either case, it can be shut down. He descends the steps. Without looking back, no resentment or vengeance in his mind. Just a task, as clear as an equation on a blackboard. The world operates by rules. Magic is part of the world, so magic operates by rules. The rules can be found. Once found, the rules can be applied. Anyone can apply them. Even someone with no pulse. Especially someone with no pulse. Because such a person has nothing to lose and nothing to distract them. The trail leads south. It's a 4-day walk to the port of Havenmark. Ethan walks with steady steps. His suitcase weighs him down with notebooks. His feet wear out quickly. By evening, he sits down under a tree by the road. He strikes a fire with flint and tinder. No mage in the world carries flint. Why bother when you can just snap your fingers? Ethan can't snap his fingers, but he knows that birch bark flares up at 220 degrees and thin shavings catch a single spark. He chews the last piece of academic bread and stares into the flame. Ordinary, not magical. It works by the same laws: fuel, oxidizer, ignition temperature, the combustion triangle. Remove one side and any fire goes out, even a magical one. He smiles, closes his eyes, falls asleep. On the second day of the journey, it started to rain. Light, cold, the kind of rain that won't soak you in a minute, but will turn your clothes into a wet rag in an hour. Ethan covered his suitcase with his jacket. His notebooks were more important than keeping his back dry. By noon on the third day, he reached a crossroads. A road marker pointed in 3 directions: Havenmark to the south, the capital to the east, the northern wastes straight ahead. Next to the stone stood a bulletin board. Ethan walked over and read it. Most of the notices were about trade caravans. 2 were for hiring guards. One notice, in large letters, stated that by decree of the Crown Council, entry into the northern provinces was restricted due to increased activity of shell dragons. Ethan read it again. Dragons. Shell dragons. He'd heard about them at the academy. Creatures the size of a 2-story house, armored scales. They'd been considered extinct for the last 300 years. Now they were returning, and mages couldn't stop them. 5 high-ranking battle mages had died in the past year. He took out notebook number 7 and flipped to the right page. There were his notes from the lecture on combat zoology. Shell dragons. Their scales can withstand a direct hit from a stream of fire. Ice spears shatter on contact. Lightning doesn't penetrate. The instructor explained this by saying that the dragons possess a spiritual resilience that surpasses any magical attack. Ethan had jotted down a note next to it at the time. Nonsense. If the scales reflect 3 different types of attacks with different physical properties, then it's not a matter of spirituality, but of the scale's own properties. Reflection of heat, plus mechanical strength, plus electrical insulation. Either 3 different properties at once, which is unlikely, or a single property that appears to be 3. Which one? He closed his notebook and walked on. The rain hadn't let up. By the evening of the 3rd day, he saw lights. Havenmark lay in a valley between 2 hills. A port city, neither large nor small. 2,020 residents. A harbor to the west. Commercial districts in the center. Artisanal neighborhoods to the east. Cheap tenement houses to the south by the river. Ethan entered the city through the southern gate. The guard gave him a cursory glance. Just a kid with a suitcase. No sword, no staff, no magical symbols. Not worth his time. He found a tavern by the smell of food. The sign read, "The Copper Mug." Inside, it was warm and noisy. Wooden tables, a low ceiling, a fireplace in the corner. It smelled of roasted meat and beer. Ethan sat down at a corner table. He ordered the cheapest soup and a piece of bread. 2 copper coins. He had 3 silver coins left. 1 silver coin is worth 100 copper coins. That means he has enough for 300 servings of soup, or 150 days if he eats twice a day, or 100 if he factors in housing costs. Not enough. He needs an income, and fast. He ate and looked around, a habit of observing. There were about 20 people in the room, artisans after work, a few sailors, 2 men in nice cloaks, most likely small-time merchants. A girl was sitting at the counter, young, about 18. Her light brown hair was pulled back into a bun. Her hands were strong. Her apron was covered in flour. She was talking to the tavern owner and looked upset. Ethan wasn't listening. It was none of his business. He finished his soup and opened notebook number 1. He began making a list of what he needed for his workshop. A room, a workbench, a vise, a set of files, a hammer, a small anvil, bellows, a supply of coal, glass tubes, copper wire, mercury for a thermometer, alcohol for a spirit level, sand for grinding, a sheet of iron for a shield. The list took up half a page. By the most conservative estimate, it would cost 15 silver coins. He had 3, a shortfall of 12. He needed an order, or 10 orders. The tavern door slammed open. 3 men entered, young men, in fine boots. On the hand of the one in front, a ring with a red stone glistened, the mark of a fire mage. A junior aristocrat with a magical rank. He looked about 20. He acted like he was 14. He was already drunk before he even walked in. So were his companions. They sat down at the central table. They demanded wine. The landlady brought it. A girl in a flour-stained apron stood up and walked to the far end of the bar. She knew this type. Ethan did too. Half an hour later, the fire mage started making a racket. He spoke loudly. He told the story of how he'd burned out a rat's nest in Lord So-and-so's warehouse and received 5 gold pieces for it. His friends laughed. Then he noticed Ethan, a kid in gray, no insignia, with glasses, sitting in the corner writing in a notebook. "Hey, you." Ethan didn't look up. "Hey, I'm talking to you, you good-for-nothing." The word good-for-nothing sounded like a spit in the face. In Erden, it wasn't a curse, it was a social status. But coming from a drunk's mouth, it sounded exactly like a curse. Ethan looked up. He looked at the fire wielder. He looked at his ring. He looked at the ceiling above his head. The ceiling was wooden. The beams were oak. Dry. There were cracks between the beams. Dust had accumulated in the cracks over the past few years. Flour dust. The tavern stood 2 streets away from the mill. The whole neighborhood reeked of flour. Ethan had noticed it as soon as he walked in. The smell. A thin white coating on the windowsills. He looked at the ceiling and thought. Then he slowly rummaged through his suitcase. He took out notebook number 3. He opened it to page 112. Flour dust. Concentration of an explosive mixture. The lower is 40 grams per cubic meter. The ignition temperature is about 400 degrees. A junior mage's fireball is about 1,000, with room to spare. He closed the notebook. He looked at the ceiling again. He stood up. He walked over to the landlady. He quietly asked if she had a bag of flour and some rope. The landlady looked at him as if he were crazy. He explained, briefly. That guy at the table is about to start setting things on fire. He always starts setting things on fire. Give me a fist-sized bag of flour and 3 meters of rope, and your tavern won't burn down. The landlady looked at the fire mage. She looked at Ethan. She handed him the flour and the rope. Ethan returned to his seat. Under the table, he quickly and quietly made a small bag. He filled it with flour. He tied the rope to it. He stood on a chair. He secured the little bag to a ceiling beam directly above the passageway between his table and the center of the room. The rope ran down to the table leg. One tug and the bag would fall. He sat down. He continued writing in his notebook. He didn't have to wait long. The fire mage stood up. He walked over. He loomed over the table. His fingers were already smoldering with tiny sparks. He said there was no place for an empty bag in decent establishments. That if Ethan didn't get rid of it himself, he would get rid of him. Ethan didn't stand up. He looked up at the fire mage and said nothing. That was worse than words. The fire mage bared his teeth. He took a step back. He raised his hand. A fist-sized ball of fire formed in his palm. Hot air hit their faces. The tavern fell silent. The landlady pressed herself against the bar. The girl in the flour-stained apron grabbed the edge of the table. The fire mage threw the ball. Ethan yanked on the rope. The sack of flour fell from the ceiling right into the fireball's path. The sack burst open. Flour dust instantly filled the space around the fireball. A massive conflagration. The flour suspension in the air burns completely and instantly upon contact with an open flame. The flash was blinding. White. As bright as lightning. And completely harmless. Because the flash had burned up all the oxygen within a 2-meter radius around the mage, the fireball went out. But that was only half the trouble. The mage was standing in the center of the oxygen-depleted zone. He had nothing to breathe. He fell to his knees, gasping for air. His face turned crimson. His friends jumped to their feet but didn't understand what was happening. 3 seconds. 5. The air began to return. Convection. Ethan counted in his head. 7 seconds. The fire mage took his first normal breath. 10. The second. He was on all fours, coughing. His fire had gone out. Completely. Even the sparks on his fingers. Ethan stood up. He raised his mug, took a sip. He set it back down. He said in an even voice, "Never use an open flame in a room with a flour mist. That's basic safety procedure at any mill." The fireman looked up at him. There was no anger in his eyes. There was fear. His own fire had suffocated him. He didn't understand how. He didn't understand why. His friends grabbed him by the arms and dragged him outside. The door slammed shut. The tavern fell silent. Ethan sat down. He pulled the bowl closer. The soup had cooled, but it was still edible. He calmly began to eat. A girl in a flour-stained apron stood at the bar and watched him. Her mouth was open. Her eyes were wide. She came over a minute later. She sat down across from him. She said her name was Lily Morgan, that her father had owned a mill 2 blocks from here, that he died a year ago when the mill exploded, that the mill explodes every 6 months and no one knows why. that she was now trying to fix it herself, but every time something went wrong. Ethan set down his spoon. He looked at her closely. Young, tired. Her hands were calloused, dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. But her gaze was sharp. She saw what he had done. She realized it was a deliberate action, not an accident. That's important. He asked what type of grinding mechanism the mill uses. She answered. He asked how high the ceilings are in the milling room. She answered. He asked if there were any ventilation openings. She said there were 2 small windows at the top. Ethan took out a notebook. He tore out a blank sheet. No, he took a napkin. Better. He began to draw. A diagram of the exhaust system. Simple. 2 air intakes at floor level. A central duct leading up through the roof. A cap on top to keep the rain out. The principle is elementary. Flour dust is heavier than air and accumulates at the bottom. Warm air from the friction of the millstones rises upward. If the right draft is created, the dust will be drawn outside before it reaches an explosive concentration. He drew and explained. Lily listened. She didn't interrupt. She looked at the diagram. He could see her was doing the math in her head, estimating the dimensions, relating them to the actual building. A smart girl. Very smart. It's just that no one had ever given her the right words. He finished. He handed her the napkin. He said that if she built this exhaust system, the mill would stop exploding. Forever. Lily looked at the napkin. She looked at him. Her lips trembled for a second. She asked why the mill had exploded before. Ethan explained. Flour dust in the air becomes explosive at a certain concentration. Any spark, any friction, any overheating, and the entire volume ignites at once. It's not a curse, not a spell, not the wrath of the spirits. It's physics. Lily was silent. Then she said quietly that her father had died because she'd persuaded him to increase the milling capacity. More flour means more dust. More dust means an explosion. She thought it was her fault. She'd been living with that for a year. Ethan looked at her. He could have said a lot. He could have said nothing. He said simply, "Your father didn't die because you're stupid. He died because no one in all of Airden had written a safety manual for the mill. It's the world's fault, not yours." Lily clutched the napkin with the diagram in both hands, tightly, as if it were the only thing she'd held on to that was reliable all year. She said she'd pay him for the design. Ethan named his price, 2 silver coins. It was cheap. He knew it. She knew it. But he needed the money now, and she needed a working mill. A fair deal. They shook hands. Ethan finished his soup. He asked the landlady for the address of some cheap lodging. The landlady pointed to an apartment building 3 streets away. A room cost 10 copper coins a night. He stepped out of the tavern. The rain had stopped. The night air smelled of salt and fish. The harbor was nearby. He walked toward the apartment building, thinking. He had his first order, 2 silver coins, plus the 3 he already had. 5. He needed 10 more for the workshop. But that was a manageable task, not a hopeless one. Lily Morgan remained in the tavern, a napkin in her hands, and 20 other people who had seen how the boy, without a single drop of mana, had extinguished a fireball with a fistful of flour. Word would get around. It definitely would. In the morning, Ethan went to the mill. Lily met him at the gate. The building was old. Stone walls, a wooden roof, 2 stories. On the first floor were the millstones. On the second floor, a hopper. Everything was covered with a thin layer of white dust. He walked around the mill's perimeter. He measured the length and width with his strides, 10 by 8. The ceiling height on the first floor was about 4 meters. By eye. He'd need a precise tool, but this would do for now. 2 windows upstairs. Small, square, almost no draft. He went inside. The smell of flour, thick, slightly sweet. The millstones were stationary. Lily hadn't run them since last month. She was afraid. Ethan stood in the center of the milling room and began sketching in his notebook. The exhaust plan had been simple on a napkin, but reality demanded details. The duct diameter, the pipe height, the location of the intake vents. He did the math. The room's volume was approximately 320 cubic meters. The milling capacity produces approximately 40 grams of dust per minute at full capacity. The explosive concentration is 40 grams per cubic meter. This means that without ventilation, at full capacity, a dangerous concentration is reached in 8 minutes. With ventilation, the air must be exchanged at least 4 times per hour. This requires a pipe with a diameter of at least 40 centimeters and a height of at least 6 meters above the roofline. Natural draft, with a temperature difference of 15 degrees, will produce a flow velocity of about 1.5 meters per second. That's enough. He spent 3 hours drawing the plans. Lily sat next to him on a sack of grain and watched. Sometimes she asked questions, good questions, not why, but how exactly. She asked where to get a pipe of that diameter. Ethan thought for a moment. Clay. A fired clay pipe. There's bound to be a potter in town. She nodded and said she knew a potter on East Street. He owed her for some flour. Ethan kept sketching. By noon, the design was ready. 4 sheets from a notebook. Top view, side view, cross-section. A list of materials. He handed the sheets to Lily and said that construction would take about 10 days if he had 1 helper. She said she was the helper, she herself. Ethan looked at her. She was serious. He nodded. For the next 10 days, they worked together. The potter made a 3-section pipe in exchange for the debt. Ethan laid the brick foundation himself. Lily mixed the mortar. The pipe was installed on the roof by the end of the 4th day. Ethan made the intake openings at floor level out of wooden boxes lined with sheet metal. They found the sheet metal at a dump near the port. He spent 2 evenings straightening it out with a hammer. On the 7th day, the system was assembled. On the 7th day, they started up the millstones. Ethan stood inside with a homemade indicator, a white cloth stretched over a frame. If dust settled on it, the draft was weak. If the cloth was clean, the draft was working. After an hour of the millstones running, the cloth was almost clean. There was a light coating, but it was far from a dangerous concentration. The mill was working. It didn't explode. Lily stood by the millstones and listened to their hum. Her expression was strange, not joyful, not sad, something in between, like that of a person who, for the first time in a long while, had allowed herself not to be afraid. She turned to Ethan and said thank you. He nodded. He said the draft needed to be checked once a month and the chimney cleaned every 6 months. He wrote out the instructions for her on a separate sheet of paper. Simple, clear, 5 points. She paid him 2 silver coins. Ethan put the money away. 5 silver coins, his total capital, 10 days' work, minus the cost of food and lodging during that time. Net income, 1 silver coin and 20 copper coins. Not much, but the mill was working now, and Lily now knew why it hadn't worked before. That was worth more than silver. For the next 2 weeks, Ethan looked for a space for a workshop. Havenmark was a practical town. Rent ranged from 3 silver coins a month for a decent space to 1 for a dilapidated building. He found a dilapidated building. A former carriage house on the eastern outskirts. The roof leaked in 2 places. The walls were intact. The floor was dirt. One advantage, there was a blacksmith shop nearby. That meant the neighbors were used to noise and smoke. The owner of the shed asked for 1 silver coin a month. Ethan offered 80 copper coins and to repair the roof at his own expense. The owner agreed. Ethan patched the roof in 2 days. Clay and straw, not pretty, but sturdy. Inside, he set up a workbench made from planks he'd found at that same port dump. He haggled with a junk dealer and got a vise for 30 copper coins. He already had a hammer. He bought a set of 6 files for 1 silver coin. Expensive, but he couldn't do without them. The rest of his money went toward odds and ends, wire, nails, fish bladder glue, lubricating oil, and candles. Lots of candles. He worked late into the night. By the end of the 3rd week in Havenmark, the workshop was ready. Small, cramped, smelling of dampness and oil, but it was his. He carved the sign out of a plank. He burned the letters with a red-hot nail. Kane, Clocks, locks, strange questions. He hung it above the door. The first customer came on the third day, a woman with a child. The door to her house creaked so badly that the child woke up every night. Ethan examined the hinges, rust and warping. He took them off, cleaned them up, lubricated them, leveled the door frame with a wedge. Half an hour's work. He charged 5 copper coins. The woman left satisfied. The second customer, an old man with a spyglass. The lens was cracked. Ethan examined the telescope, a brass body, 2 lenses. The objective lens was split in half. He couldn't make a new lens. He didn't have the glass or the tools to grind it. But he could glue the old one back together. Fish glue, a thin layer. Carefully align the edges, press it together, let it dry. The optical quality would suffer, but the telescope would work. He did it. The old man looked through the telescope. He nodded. He paid 10 copper coins and left. Third, fourth, fifth. Creaking doors, sticky locks, a broken weather vane. Small jobs, pennies. But every customer left and told someone else. The guy in the shed on East Street. No mana. Wears glasses. Fixes everything. Charges cheap. Toward the end of the first month, the 6th customer arrived. He was unlike the others. A man in his 30s wearing a nice coat, a ring on his finger, but without a stone. A former aristocrat or minor noble. He walked into the workshop, looked around, and said he'd heard about the incident at the tavern. Ethan waited. The man said he had a problem. His bedroom on the 2nd floor of the house had windows facing the street. His neighbor was a mage, a mid-rank one. They'd had a falling out. The neighbor had a habit of throwing small fireballs at his windows at night. Not dangerous, just annoying. The guards don't intervene because he's a mage. The man asked if Ethan could do something to keep mages out of his bedroom. Ethan thought for a moment. Fire projectiles, low power, flying through the window. He'd need protection against heat. Shutters wouldn't help. Wood burns. Metal shutters are expensive and heavy. But there's a simpler option. Double-paned glass with an air gap. Air is a poor conductor of heat. When a small fireball strikes the outer pane, it will lose most of its energy heating the first pane and the air between the layers. The second pane will remain intact. Plus, a wet cloth on the inner frame acts as an additional heat buffer. The evaporation of water absorbs a huge amount of energy. He explained this to the man. The man listened with growing amazement. Ethan named his price, 5 silver coins for labor and materials. The man didn't haggle. Ethan built the double frames in 4 days. He installed them. They worked. The man was delighted. He told 3 friends. They told 3 more. By the end of the first month, Ethan had 8 orders lined up. The money started coming in, slowly but steadily. He worked 16 hours a day. In the morning, orders. In the evening, notebooks. He reread his notes from the academy and added to them. He drew new diagrams. He calculated. He tested old hypotheses. Every night before bed, he opened notebook number 12, the last one, the most important one. On the first page was a single sentence. Magic obeys the laws of physics. Prove it. Below it was a growing table. On the left, the type of magic. On the right, the observed physical parameters. Fire, ice, lightning, earth, wind, water. Opposite each type were rows of data, temperatures, masses, speeds, duration of existence, and consumption of resources from the environment. The table was still far from complete, but it was growing, every day. And every day, the world of magic became a little more understandable. In his 2nd month living in Haven, Mark Ethan was returning from the shop in the evening with a skein of copper wire, the alley between the port warehouse and the fish market. It was dark. It smelled of fish and wet rope. 3 men stepped out of the shadows, 2 in front, 1 behind. The one in front had a knife. The one behind had a club. The one in the middle was unarmed, but burly. Ethan stopped. He assessed the situation, quickly. The alley was narrow, 2 meters, nowhere to run. Fighting is pointless. The body of a 19-year-old guy with no muscle mass and no combat training, against 3 of them. He opened his mouth to say that all he had on him was a coil of wire and 3 copper coins. He didn't get the chance. Behind the rear robber, something thudded. It was the body of the rear assailant who had slammed into the wall and slid down it like a wet rag. A woman stood over him. Tall, very tall, at least 1.80 meters, broad shoulders, short dark hair, a city guard uniform. On her belt was a baton and a bundle of leather straps for tying things up. She grabbed the middle robber by the collar with one hand and yanked him backward. He fell. The one in front with the knife spun around. He looked at her. He looked at the knife in his hand. He looked at her fist. He dropped the knife and ran. She didn't chase after him. She tied up the 2 remaining robbers with the straps quickly and expertly. She turned to Ethan. She said that the alley by the fish market was the dumbest place to be walking after sunset. Ethan agreed. He thanked her. He asked her name. Megan O'Rourke, city guard sergeant, daughter of a dock worker. He introduced himself. Kane, workshop on East Street. She nodded. She said she'd heard of him, the guy who put out the mage with flour. Ethan clarified that he hadn't extinguished it, but had created conditions under which the fire had extinguished itself. She gave him a long look. She snorted. She said she didn't see the difference. Then she said she'd walk him home if it was on his way. They walked in silence for the first 5 minutes. Ethan noticed that she was taking a specific route, not the shortest one. She avoided dark corners. She stuck to well-lit areas. She automatically checked the side alleys, a professional habit. He asked how long she'd been with the guard. 7 years, she replied. Since she was 14. Her father had arranged it. He was a dock worker and wanted his daughter to have a steady income. She became the only female sergeant in the Havenmark City Guard. Not because she was the best, because she was the biggest. She said this without pride, as a matter of fact. Ethan listened. She spoke little, but every word was to the point. Nothing superfluous. He noticed something else. As they passed a bookstore, she slowed her pace. For a split second, almost imperceptibly, he remembered it. They reached his workshop. She looked at the sign, read it aloud. Kane. Clocks, locks, strange questions. She chuckled, said goodnight and left. Ethan went inside and jotted it down in his notebook. Megan O'Rourke, city guard sergeant. 1.80 meters, no mana. A professional. She walks past bookstores more slowly than she does past bars. Interesting. A week later, she came to his workshop. Not on personal business, on official business. The city guard wanted to repair the locks on 4 warehouses at the port. The old locks were rusty and half of them wouldn't close. Ethan went to take a look. 4 warehouses, 8 locks. 6 needed to be replaced. 2 could be repaired. He drew up an estimate. Megan looked at the numbers and approved it. He worked for 3 days. She came by to check on him. Each time she stayed a little longer than necessary. She watched him work. Once she asked why he measured every part with a ruler when he could just eyeball it. Ethan replied that the eye can be off by 2 millimeters, and a lock with a 2 millimeter tolerance can be opened with a fingernail. She thought for a second, nodded, said she'd never thought of that. He finished the locks. The guard paid him 1.5 silver coins. Not bad. Megan brought the money personally and stayed for tea. Ethan didn't have any tea. He had boiling water and some mint that Lily had brought that morning. Lily had been coming every morning for the past 2 weeks. She brought food, bread, eggs, and sometimes meat pies. Ethan tried to pay her, but Lily refused. She said he'd saved the mill and that settled the debt. He stopped arguing after the 3rd time. She'd come by and stay for an hour or 2, watching him work. Sometimes she'd help out, hold a part, pass a tool. She had nimble hands and good coordination. She remembered things after seeing them just once. Once, Ethan was assembling a clock mechanism. A simple one. Gears, a spring, a pendulum. Lily watched. When he finished, she asked why the pendulum swings at a constant speed. Ethan explained. The period of a pendulum depends on the length of the string, not on the amplitude. Galileo's law. She didn't know who Galileo was. He explained. She listened. Her eyes were like those of students at a good lecture. When the world suddenly feels bigger. Megan sat in the workshop drinking hot water with mint. She was silent. Then she suddenly said that she too had noticed something about the city. She said that over the last month there had been fewer merchants from the north at the market, by about a third. Wool prices had gone up, by 12% to be exact. Ethan looked at her. 12% was the exact figure, not a rough estimate. She'd calculated it. The city guard sergeant had calculated market prices and the percentage of merchants who'd left. He asked how she knew about the 12%. She hesitated. She blushed. A big, strong woman in a city guard uniform blushed like a little girl. She mumbled that she sometimes took notes, for herself, prices and quantities, to know what was going on in the city. He asked to see her notes. She refused, said it was nonsense and her handwriting was terrible. He didn't press the issue, but he remembered. Megan O'Rourke kept her own statistics, on her own, without orders, without training, because she was curious. That was more valuable than any magical rank. He told her so, simply and directly. He said that the ability to spot patterns and record data was a skill taught over many years at the best educational institutions, and that she was doing it on her own, without any training. Megan stared at him. Then she stood up. She said it was time for her shift, and she walked away at a brisk pace, a little faster than usual. 2 days later, she brought him a notebook, a thin one, with a leather cover, filled with large, uneven handwriting, numbers, dates, product names, the number of carts at the market by day, average prices by week, notes on the arrival of caravans. Ethan flipped through the pages and silently tallied the figures. The data covered 4 months, raw, unstructured, but accurate. He saw in them what she didn't see because she didn't know how to look. A trend. Trade with the north was declining, not in a sudden drop, but gradually. Caravans were arriving less and less frequently. Prices were rising. This was due to the shell dragons in the north. The roads were becoming more dangerous. Merchants were afraid. He showed her the trend. He sketched a simple graph on a sheet of paper, an axis, points, a line. She looked at the line and her expression changed, not out of surprise, out of something else, because her notes turned out not to be nonsense, because there was meaning in them, because someone had looked at them and seen not just messy handwriting, but data. She said she had to go, and once again she walked away at a brisk pace, but she took the notebook with her, and the next day she brought a new one, with data from the past week, already with a graph, crooked, sloppy, but a graph nonetheless. Ethan looked at it and thought that in 6 months, this woman would be in charge not of a patrol, but of logistics for an entire neighborhood. Lily came by in the morning. Megan came in the evening. The workshop was no longer just a workshop. It was becoming a place where people gathered. The 3rd month in Havenmark began with a letter, a real one, on paper, with a seal, delivered by a courier in a blue uniform. Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was an invitation from a man named Dorian Hawk, a merchant, the owner of 3 caravans on the southern trade route. The invitation was for a meeting at his townhouse. No details, just the date and time. Ethan went. Hawk's house stood in the commercial district, 2 stories, stone, with iron shutters. Dorian Hawk turned out to be a man of about 45, short, heavy-set, with quick eyes and a habit of drumming his fingers on the table. He seated Ethan in his study and got straight to the point. He said that his caravan had been attacked 3 weeks ago on the northern trade route. Not by bandits. A mage. A mid-ranking fire mage. A mercenary. Hired by a competitor. The mage burned 2 wagons of goods and killed the wagon driver. The guards are powerless. The guild refused to provide protection because Hawk has no magical patron. Hiring a mage bodyguard costs 20 gold pieces a month. Hawk doesn't have 20 gold pieces a month. Hawk has 3. He'd heard about a guy who put out a mage with flour. He wants to know if this guy can protect the caravan from a fire mage. For 3 gold pieces. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. When Hawk finished, Ethan asked 7 questions. What is the caravan's route? How many wagons? What is the cargo? How far to the destination? How many days on the road? Where exactly did the last attack take place? What rank was the mage, according to the survivors' estimates? Hawk answered all 7. The route was standard, the southern trail to Bridgewater. 6 wagons, fabrics and ceramics, a 4-day journey. The attack took place on the 2nd day in Windhall Gorge. The mage looked to be about 30 years old. His rank was unknown, but the fire struck in a solid strip 10 meters wide. Ethan did the math. A 10-meter continuous strip is serious, at least mid-rank. 50 to 60 pulses. The temperature of such a stream is about 1,200 degrees. Duration, 5 to 7 seconds before recharging. The gorge was narrow, stone walls, nowhere to run. A classic ambush. He thought for 3 minutes. Hawk waited. Then Ethan said he needed a week to prepare and a list of materials. Hawk asked what kind of list. Ethan wrote it down on Hawk's own paper. 10 meters of thin copper sheet. 20 kilograms of clay. Felt. 2 buckets. Quicklime. 5 meters of iron chain. 2 wooden poles 3 meters long. Rope. Lots of rope. Hawk looked at the list. He looked at Ethan. He asked where the weapons were. Ethan replied that he didn't need any weapons. He needed to make sure the fire wouldn't work. Hawk agreed, not because he believed it, because 3 gold pieces was 6 times cheaper than a mage bodyguard, and he had no choice. Ethan returned to the workshop and got to work. The first 2 days were spent on calculations. He pored over notebooks and blueprints. The fire mage would strike from cover. That meant he needed protection that could be deployed quickly, in 10 seconds at most. A stationary shield wouldn't work. He needed a mobile one. He sketched and crossed out. Sketched and crossed out. On the 3rd sketch, he found the solution. 2 shields. Not ordinary ones. Modular ones. The base is a wooden frame. A sheet of copper is stretched over the frame. Copper is an excellent heat conductor. It won't stop the fire, but will distribute the heat across the entire surface. Behind the copper is a layer of wet felt. The evaporation of water will absorb the energy. Behind the felt is a layer of clay mixed with straw. Thermal insulation. Together, the 3 layers can withstand a direct hit from a 1,200-degree fire blast for 4 to 5 seconds. That's enough, because after 5 seconds, the mage recharges. And during those 3 or 4 seconds of pause, you can act. But that's not enough. Defense without a counterattack is pointless. The fire mage will simply go around and strike again. We need to deprive him of his fire. Ethan remembered the flower explosion in the tavern. The principle is the same. Burn out the oxygen. But in an open space, flower won't work. The wind will blow it away. A different approach is needed. Quicklime. When it reacts with water, it releases a huge amount of heat and carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air. It spreads along the ground. It displaces the oxygen. If he throws a bucket of quicklime into a puddle next to the mage, carbon dioxide will fill the ravine to a height of a man's stature in seconds. The mage won't be able to breathe, and his fire will go out, because without oxygen, there's no combustion. The problem is precision. The bucket needs to be delivered close to the mage. Ethan can't throw it 20 meters, but he can build a simple catapult. No, too bulky for the caravan. A sling. No, it won't be accurate enough. Then there's an easier way. An iron chain, a bucket at the end. Wind it up and let go. With a chain 2.5 meters long and the right technique, the throwing range is 10 to 12 meters. That's enough if he knows the mage's position in advance. And he will know the position, because Windhall Gorge is narrow and there are exactly 3 spots for an ambush. He'd studied it on a map he borrowed from Hawk. On the 4th day, Ethan assembled the first shield. On the 5th, the second. On the 6th, he conducted a test. He asked Lily to bring some coals from the mill's furnace. She brought them and asked why. He didn't bother to explain everything. He said he was testing its fire resistance. He placed the shield upright. He dropped the hot coals onto the copper surface. He watched as the heat spread. He timed it. After 3 minutes, the felt behind the copper was warm but not hot. The clay behind the felt remained cold. It works. For a full-scale test, he needed real fire, real magical fire, which he didn't have that. He wrote in his notebook that the test had been partially successful. The theoretical calculations were confirmed 70%. The remaining 30% was a risk, an acceptable one. On the 7th day, the caravan left Havenmark. 6 wagons, 14 people, 12 drivers. Hawk on horseback, Ethan on the first wagon with 2 shields, a bucket of lime, and a coil of chain. The road headed south, smooth, dusty. The first day passed without incident. They set up camp by a stream for the night. Ethan didn't sleep. He sat by the fire and counted. Tomorrow, Windhall Gorge. If there's an attack, it'll be on the stretch between the second and third turns. There, the gorge's walls rise 8 meters. The road is 4 meters wide. The perfect spot for a fire mage. The mage will stand at the top and strike downwards. The advantage of height. But if he's standing at the top, that means he's far away, 20 meters at least. At that distance, the density of the fire stream drops by half. So does the temperature. The shield will hold out longer. And another thing, if the mage is up top, he's standing on the edge of a cliff. And a bucket of lime thrown from below might not reach him. We need to change the plan. Ethan took out his notebook and started calculating again. If the mage is up there, the carbon dioxide won't reach him. It's heavier than air. It'll rise 1 meter to 1.5 meters at most. So the lime isn't for the mage. The lime is for the gorge. If we fill the bottom of the gorge with carbon dioxide, the stream of fire will pass through an environment with reduced oxygen content. The combustion will weaken. The temperature will drop. The shield will last longer. And the mage up above will have to expend more mana to sustain the fire in an oxygen-depleted environment. He'll tire faster. The pauses between attacks will grow longer. And during one of those pauses, the caravan will pass through the dangerous stretch. Don't kill the mage, outlast him. That's a fundamental difference. Ethan wasn't trying to win, he was trying to get through. In the morning, the caravan moved on. Ethan moved to the first wagon and hung shields on either side. He instructed the drivers. When the fire starts, don't run. Lie down on the ground. Press yourselves against the wagons. The wagons carrying cloth and pottery will burn, but the people behind the shields and under the wagons would survive. That was the main thing. Goods could be earned again. People couldn't be replaced. Hawk listened, his face pale, but he nodded. He had already lost 1 driver. He didn't want to lose any more. Windhall Gorge opened up 2 hours into the journey. Narrow, gray walls, shadows from the rocks. Ethan looked up. He counted the turns. First, clear. Second, clear. Between the second and third, he saw a shadow at the edge of the wall. It flashed and vanished. He whistled. A prearranged signal. The drivers pulled on the reins. The caravan slowed down. Ethan jumped down from the wagon. He picked up a bucket of lime. He walked over to the puddle by the wall. It had dried up. Almost. But there was water. A thin layer at the bottom. He tipped the bucket over. The lime hissed. White steam, heat, and a heavy, invisible gas flowed along the bottom of the gorge. The smell of burnt stone. 3 seconds. 5. A layer of carbon dioxide 1/2 meter thick covered the bottom for 10 meters. From above, a bluck the fire. Roaring. Bright. The stream came down at an angle. Ethan raised his shield. He stood in front of the first cart. The copper heated up instantly. It turned red hot. The felt sizzled. But the fire was passing through the layer of carbon dioxide. It was weaker than it should have been, noticeably weaker. Instead of a continuous stream, it broke into pieces. It flickered. It lost intensity. The shield held. 4 seconds. 5. 6. The fire died down. A pause. Ethan shouted at the drivers to urge the horses on. The horses bolted. The wagons rumbled over the stones. Ethan ran alongside the first wagon and counted. The flamethrower's reload time at medium range was 3 to 4 seconds. The wagons had traveled 12 meters. The second blast. Weaker. Carbon dioxide still hung over the road. The fire passed overhead. It singed the tarp on the third wagon. The fabric smoked but didn't catch fire. Ethan threw a wet rag onto the tarp. Steam. The smoke cleared. The third strike didn't come. The caravan passed the dangerous stretch. It emerged from the gorge onto the open road. Ethan turned around. A figure in a dark cloak stood at the edge of the cliff. It was looking down. It wasn't pursuing them. The mage hadn't expected the caravan to pass through. He'd expected them to run, to turn back, to abandon their cargo. That's what had happened last time. This time, they didn't run. This time, they rode through the fire. Hawk rode up to Ethan on his horse. His hands were shaking. His face was pale. But he was alive, and the caravan was intact. 14 people, 6 wagons, 1 awning set ablaze. Ethan sat down on the ground. His hands were shaking too. Adrenaline. He's no hero. He's an engineer who made the right calculations, with a 30% margin of error, which worked in his favor this time. Next time, it might not work out. He needed to reduce the margin of error. He needed more data. He needed a thermometer that could withstand 1,000 degrees. He needed a way to observe magic up close and safely. He needed allies. Hawk paid 3 gold pieces, as promised, and added 1 more. "For your nerves," he said. Ethan put the money away. 4 gold pieces is 40 silver. His workshop paid for itself in a single caravan. But something else was more important than the money. That evening, at a roadside tavern on the way back, 3 coachmen joined him at his table. One of them was old, gray-haired, with a scar running across his entire cheek. He said he'd been driving caravans for 40 years. He'd seen mages hundreds of times, and for the first time, he'd seen a caravan pass through fire without losing a single person. He asked how Ethan had done it. Ethan explained, simply, no fancy words. Lime and water produce a heavy gas. The gas displaces the air. Without air, the fire weakens. A 3-layered shield holds back the weakened fire. That's all. The old man listened. Then he said it wasn't fair. Then he thought for a moment and said that, actually, it couldn't be any fairer. Then he asked Ethan to teach him how to make such shields, just in case there wasn't a guy with glasses around next time. Ethan took out his notebook and began to sketch. Word of the caravan would reach Havenmark before the caravan itself. Ethan knew that. A boy with no mana had led a trade caravan right through a battle mage's ambush. He didn't kill the mage, he didn't even wound him, he just walked right through. That was worse for the mage's reputation than any defeat. Defeat means there was someone stronger. But the fact that someone simply walked right past, as if walking through the rain, means you're not a threat. It means you can be ignored. For a mage, there's no worse insult. The caravan returned to Havenmark on the 4th day. Ethan jumped down from the wagon at the eastern gate and headed for the workshop. On the way, he was called out to 3 times. The first time, it was a shopkeeper from the next street over. He asked if it was true that Ethan had led the caravan through fire. Ethan said it was true. The second time, it was the blacksmith's wife from the neighboring workshop. She asked the same thing. He nodded. The third time, it was a boy of about 10. He just stood there and watched. He didn't ask anything, but his eyes were wide. Word had already spread, faster than Ethan had expected. He walked into the workshop. Everything was in place. Lily had stopped by while he was away. On the workbench was a plate covered with a cloth. Under the cloth were pastries. Cold. From yesterday. But she had come. He sat down at the table and began to take notes. Notebook number 12. The page with data on fire magic. New observations. A stream of fire loses density and temperature when passing through a medium with a reduced oxygen content. The loss is approximately 40% at a carbon dioxide concentration of about 15% by volume. This is a rough estimate. Precise measurements are needed. I need a device. A 3-layer shield withstood the weakened stream for 6 seconds. The copper sheet deformed. The felt was partially charred. The clay layer remained intact. The shield is unsuitable for reuse. Single-use protection. Not good. I need something better. He wrote for 2 hours. Then he lay down and fell asleep. In the morning, Lily came by. With pastries. Hot ones. She sat down on a stool and said that the whole town was talking about the caravan. That Hawk had told everyone in the market district. That 3 other caravanners had already asked where to find the guy with glasses. Ethan nodded. That's good. But he was thinking about something else. The shields are disposable. He needs large quantities of lime. The method only works in confined spaces. In open areas, carbon dioxide dissipates in seconds. He needs more tools, more knowledge, and more hands. His own hands aren't enough. 3 days after he returned, a girl came to see him. Quiet, thin, blonde hair, long hands with slender fingers. She stood in the doorway of the workshop, twisting the hem of her apron. Ethan asked how he could help. She said her name was Haley Reed, that her father was a glassblower, that he was sick, that she'd been working in his place for the past 2 years, that she'd heard about the workshop where they fix everything, and maybe there was a job for her there. Ethan looked at her, 17 years old, maybe 16. A quiet voice, her eyes downcast, accustomed to people not looking at her. 4 mana pulses, almost a complete 0. He asked what she could do. She said she could blow glass and polish it. He asked her to show him. He gave her a piece of glass and a file. Make the surface smooth, he said. She took it. 20 minutes later, the surface was smooth, truly smooth. Ethan ran his finger over it. Not a single scratch he could feel. He looked at the light. The surface reflected it perfectly, without distortion. He knew what that kind of precision meant. It wasn't a skill. It was a gift. Hand-eye coordination at a level that couldn't be trained. You're born with it. He told her she was hired. The pay was 15 copper coins a day. Haley looked up at him for the first time. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. Pure, childlike disbelief. Like that puppy being offered food after a long fast, not believing it won't be taken away. Ethan repeated it. 15 copper coins, every day. We'll start tomorrow. She nodded and left, quickly. She practically ran off. She came the next day, and the day after that, and every day after that. For the first week, Ethan gave her simple tasks. Sanding parts, fitting glass for lamps, leveling surfaces. She did everything in silence, perfectly, without a single question. On the 3rd day, he noticed something. When he was working on a telescope lens and cursed because he couldn't get the right curvature, Haley looked at his hands. At the lens. At his hands again. Then she looked away. She had spotted the mistake, but she didn't say anything, because she wasn't used to speaking. Ethan set the lens down and said, "Haley, come here." She came over. He handed her the lens and the grinding wheel. "Show me how you do it," he said. She took them. Her fingers moved differently. They didn't press down, they glided. The lens settled onto the wheel at a different angle, more gently, more precisely. 10 minutes later, the curvature was perfect. Ethan took the lens. He looked at it. He held it up to the light. He took a second lens from the box. He compared them. Haley's lens was better, noticeably better. He sat down. He looked at Haley. She was standing there, waiting for him to say it was a fluke, or that it was no big deal, or that he didn't need her help. He told Haley, "Starting today, you're not working on fitting parts. Starting today, you're making lenses. All the lenses, only lenses. It's the most difficult job in the workshop, and I don't know anyone who does it better than you." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She didn't say anything, but her hands stopped shaking, for the first time in 3 days of working in the workshop. A week after Haley arrived, a second woman came in. Wren Castle, 20 years old, a carpenter's daughter. Sturdy. Quiet. 15 pulses. Empty. She wasn't looking for a job. She was looking for a place where no one would pity her. At her previous workshop, the owner paid her half as much as the men for the same work. He explained that it was because she was empty and should be grateful for any money at all. Ethan hired her for 20 copper coins a day, the same amount he would pay any carpenter. She looked at him for a long time. Then she asked what the catch was. He said the catch was that the work was hard and started at 6 in the morning. She nodded and showed up the next day at 5:30. The third one arrived 2 weeks later. Nora Blake, 19. A former seamstress's apprentice. 22 pulses. Low rank but not without talent. She'd been kicked out of the workshop when the owner found out that Nora was trying to improve the patterns. The owner said that sewing had to be done as she'd been taught, not however one pleased. Nora wanted to make patterns based on measurements, not by eye. Ethan took her on and tasked her with sewing covers for tools, protective cases, and carrying bags. She did everything with mathematical precision. Every stitch at an equal distance, every cut exactly along the markings. A week later, Ethan showed her how to calculate the dimensions of the pieces using formulas, and she said it was the best day of her life. The fourth was Kira Mason, 21 years old, 8 pulses. A fisherman's daughter, broad-shouldered, tanned, with the everlasting scent of the sea on her clothes. She hadn't come for work, but for an answer. Her father was building a new boat and couldn't figure out why one side was always heavier than the other. The boat was listing. Ethan went with her to the shipyard. He looked at the boat. The problem was obvious. The planks on the port side were made of a different kind of wood than those on the starboard side. Different densities, different weights. He explained. Kira's father listened with his mouth agape. He'd been building boats for 30 years and had never thought about the density of the wood. Ethan helped him recalculate the balance and add a counterweight on the lighter side. Kira watched and said nothing. The next day she came to the workshop and said she wanted to learn. Ethan asked what. She said everything. He took her on. By the end of the third month, there were 5 people working in the workshop. Ethan, Haley, Ren, Nora, Kira. And then there was Lily, who wasn't officially employed, but came in every day to keep track of orders because Ethan kept forgetting to do it. And Megan, who stopped by in the evenings and brought her notebooks with sales statistics. The workshop was getting cramped. The shed could barely fit 4 people. 5 people was impossible. Ethan looked over his finances. 4 gold pieces from the caravan, plus a month's earnings from small orders, minus salaries, minus rent, minus materials. He had 2 gold pieces and 30 silver pieces left. That would be enough to rent a larger space. He found it through Megan, a former stable on the corner of Port and East Streets. 2 stories, stone walls, wooden floors on the second story, large gates, 3 windows. The landlord wanted 5 silver coins a month. Ethan offered 4 and to do the renovations. They settled on 4.5. The move took 2 days. Ren took apart and reassembled the workbench in half a day. Kira carried the toolboxes on her shoulders. Nora sewed new cases for the most delicate instruments. Haley carried the lenses herself and wouldn't let anyone else touch them. Ethan laid out the space. The first floor was the main workshop. Workbenches, tools, a heating furnace, the anvil he'd finally bought. The second floor was the lab. A table for calculations, shelves for notebooks, a space for Haley and her lenses, a separate corner for experiments. He hung the old sign above the new gate. Kane, clocks, locks, strange questions. Lily looked at the sign and said it was time to add the word protection. Ethan thought about it. He shook his head. He said it was too early for that. Orders were coming in, not in a flood, but steadily. Locks, hinges, mechanism repairs. 2 orders for telescopes. 1 order for a water pump for a well. Haley was polishing lenses and growing more confident with each passing day. She'd started to hold her head up when she spoke. Not always, but more often. Ren silently did whatever work she was assigned. Quickly, thoroughly, without complaint. Nora drew up patterns and calculations and smiled. Kira asked 10 questions a day and memorized every answer. In the evenings, Ethan sat on the second floor and worked on his notebooks. He organized the data. He built tables. He calculated. One evening, Lily went up to him with a cup of hot herbal tea. She set it on the table. She looked at the notebook. She saw columns of numbers. She asked what it was. He said it was everything he knew about the magic of fire. Temperatures, speeds, range, burn time, oxygen consumption, behavior in different environments. She looked at the numbers and suddenly said something strange. She said it looked like a recipe. Ethan looked at her. She explained. At the mill, each type of flour requires its own grinding process. The temperature of the millstones, the rotation speed, grain moisture content. If you know all the numbers, you know the result. He smiled, for the first time in a long time. He said she was absolutely right. That magic was a recipe, with ingredients, temperatures, and proportions. It's just that no one had ever written down the recipe before. Lily smiled back. She cleared the empty cup from the table. She told him to go to sleep. He replied that he'd stay up another hour. She said half an hour. He went to bed 40 minutes later. A compromise. In the 4th month at Havenmark, a man arrived whom Ethan hadn't been expecting. Young, about 22 or 23 years old. Tall, straight back, short black hair. Dressed simply but in expensive fabric. A military bearing. A short sword and a plain scabbard hung from his belt, and on his right wrist a bracelet with 3 red stones, a sign of high rank. She entered the workshop in the morning. She looked around. She watched Haley polishing a lens, at Ren planing a board, at Kira assembling a water pump. She looked at Ethan. She said her name was Soyeon Han, a former student of the combat faculty at the Leaf Spire Academy. Rank 94 pulses. Expelled. Ethan set down his file. 94 pulses? That's the highest level. Nobility by birthright. The best spells. The best instructors. The best future. And expulsion. He asked why. Soyeon replied briefly. She hit the instructor. Ethan waited. She continued. The combat instructor was conducting a training session for the lower class students. One student with a rank of 30 pulses couldn't complete the exercise. The instructor made him stand in front of the formation and struck him with a spell. Not hard, it was painful. Just to set an example, to make the others try harder. Soyeon walked up and punched the instructor in the jaw, not with magic, with her fist. He fell. She told him that if he ever laid a hand on a student again, she'd break both his arms. She was expelled that very day. Her family disowned her. The Han family couldn't afford to have a daughter who beat up instructors at the academy. That was 3 months ago. Since then, she'd been heading south, with no money, with no destination. She'd been working odd jobs, caravans. She heard about a guy in Havenmark who leads convoys through fire without mana. She came to check it out. Ethan was looking at her. He saw her, a direct gaze, clenched fists, a quiet rage beneath the surface. Not anger at the world, anger at injustice. A huge difference. He asked what she wanted. She said she didn't know, that her whole life she'd believed her power was meant to protect those weaker than her, that at the academy they'd taught her the opposite, that power is a privilege, not a responsibility, that the weak exist so that the strong can grow. She didn't accept that, and now she's here. Ethan nodded. He said he didn't have a bodyguard position available, that he had a workshop, that in the workshop they made things that helped people without mana hold their own against mages, and that he needed someone who understood how combat magic worked from the inside, not from observing it across the hall. From the inside. How casting a spell feels, how much mana is expended, which muscles tense up, where the weak points are in the process. Soyeon listened. He saw her expression change from wary to interested. He said one more thing. He said her magic was excellent, but imagine how much better it would be if you knew exactly what you were doing. Soyeon was silent for 10 seconds. Then she asked when to start. "Tomorrow," Ethan replied. She came the next day, and everything changed. The first thing Ethan asked Soyeon to do was create a fireball, a small one, controllable, in the workshop. She looked at him as if he were an idiot. He explained. He needed to observe the process up close, with drills. He showed her what he'd prepared, a homemade thermometer based on the expansion of alcohol in a glass tube. Haley had spent 2 days polishing the tube, a simple anemometer with 4 blades on an axis to measure airflow velocity. And a hygrometer, a hair stretched across a frame. The hair lengthens as humidity rises. Rough, but it works. Soyeon created a fireball, a small one, about the size of a fist. It hovered above her palm and hummed quietly. Ethan stood half a meter away with 3 instruments and a notebook. He was taking notes. The temperature half a meter from the fireball, airflow velocity around it, changes in humidity. He asked Soyeon to hold the fireball for 30 seconds. She held it. He took notes every 5 seconds. Then he asked her to make it bigger. She did, to the size of a head. The temperature spiked, the airflow intensified, the humidity dropped. He took notes. Then he asked her to make it disappear. She made it disappear. He asked her to create it again, but slowly, very slowly, so he could see every stage of its formation. Soyeon frowned. She said she'd never done it slowly before. Magic is taught to be done quickly. Speed means survival. Slow means death. Ethan said this wasn't a battle. This was a laboratory. She tried. On the 3rd try, it worked. The fire formed slowly. Ethan could see the stages. First, the air around her palm began to tremble. Convection, heating. Then the first sparks appeared, not from her palm, from the air, 10 centimeters from her skin. Then the sparks merged, a ball of fire formed. He recorded everything. Then he sat down and counted for 2 hours. Soyeon was waiting. He looked up and said, "The fire doesn't come from you. You heat the air around your palm to the ignition temperature. When heated sufficiently, the oxygen and nitrogen in the air react. Mana is the energy you channel into the process. Like a lighter, you're not creating fire, you're igniting the air." Soyeon looked at him for a long time. Then she said that in 12 years of training, no one had ever explained it to her that way. They'd told her about the passion of the soul, about the wrath of the ancestors, about the inner fire of the heart. No one had told her that she was simply igniting the air. Ethan nodded. He said it wasn't that simple. It was more complicated than they thought. Because heating air to its ignition temperature from a distance requires an incredible concentration of energy at a single point. But that's physics. And if she understands physics, then she controls the process, not by feel, but by knowledge. For the next 2 weeks, they worked together every evening. Ethan took measurements, Soyeon worked her magic. He asked her to change the parameters, more power, less power, further away, closer, in dry air, in humid air, in the wind, indoors. Each time he recorded the data. Each time the table in notebook number 12 grew fuller. And each time Soyeon learned something new about her own magic. She learned that her fire consumes moisture from the air, and that on a dry day it's more powerful. She learned that the speed of formation depends on air pressure and that at high altitudes the fire is weaker. She learned that if she directed the stream not straight on but at a 30-degree angle to the surface, the area of impact tripled while maintaining the same mana consumption. She learned that her power limit was determined not by will but by the rate of oxygen flow to the combustion zone, and that if she created a vortex around herself before striking, oxygen would flow in faster and the strike would be stronger. Each of these insights was small. Each provided a 5 to 10% increase. Together, they created a different kind of magic. Not stronger, smarter. Ethan watched her train in the mornings in the workshop courtyard and saw the difference. Her movements had become more economical, more precise. Fewer sweeping motions, less show, more results. One evening, she was sitting on the steps of the workshop cleaning her sword. Ethan came out. He sat down next to her. She said she'd written a letter to that boy, the student whose teacher had struck him. He's 14 now. He was transferred to the business school after Soyeon was expelled. He wrote her a reply. 1 sentence. Thank you for not turning away. Soyeon held the letter in her hands and looked at it. She didn't cry. She wasn't crying. But she was breathing a little faster than usual. Ethan didn't say anything. He just sat there beside her. Sometimes silence is all you need. After a minute, she put the letter in her pocket. She stood up. She said she wanted to try the ice spell tomorrow. She knew it at a basic level. She wanted to understand how it worked, for real. Ethan nodded. Tomorrow. Soyeon went to the room she was renting across the street. Ethan stayed on the steps. He looked at the stars. He thought. He now had a workshop, a team, data, a living mage for experiments, money for the next 2 months, and a goal. Not vague, specific. To create a body of knowledge about the physics of magic, to record it, to systematize it, to make it so that any educated person could read and understand it, and use it. Not for war, for life, so that mills wouldn't explode, so that caravans could pass, so that castles wouldn't burn, so that children with a Zammer of 0 would know that the world wasn't closed off to them. He adjusted his glasses and went to sleep. In his 5th month in Havenmark, Ethan heard a name that made him stop in his tracks. Emily Sower. The name came up in the apothecary's shop where he'd gone to buy mercury for a new thermometer. The apothecary was telling a customer that a mad alchemist had appeared in town. She'd been expelled from the guild. She lives in a basement near the harbor. She's brewing some kind of junk. The stench fills the whole street. She's trying to sell potions based on her own recipes, but no one buys them because the guild hasn't approved them. Ethan asked for the address. The apothecary was surprised, but told him. Harbor Street, the 3rd house from the end. The entrance is through the basement window because the owner of the house won't let anyone in through the front door. Ethan set off. He found the house. He found the basement window. It was open and smoke was coming out of it. Not dangerous, chemical. It smelled of sulfur and something sour. He knocked on the frame. A voice came from deep within the basement, loud. A woman's voice, extremely irritated. The voice said that if he was from the homeowner, he should go to hell, and if he was from the guild, he should go even further. Ethan said he wasn't from anyone, that his name was Kane, that he had a workshop on the corner of Port and East Streets, that he'd heard about an alchemist trying to systematize her recipes. Silence. Then footsteps. A face appeared in the window. Red hair, freckles, soot on her forehead. Green eyes. Angry. 25 years old, maybe 26. She looked at him. He looked at her. She asked what he wanted. He asked if he could come in. She said her place was a mess. He said he was used to it. She stepped aside. He climbed in through the window. The basement was small, 3 by 4 meters. A table against the wall. Dozens of vials on the table. Flasks, mortars, scales. Papers covered in fine handwriting. Bags of powder on the floor. Dried herbs hanging from ropes under the ceiling. And the smell. Thick, layered. Sulfur, acid. Something floral. Something burnt. Ethan looked around. He spotted the most important thing. Scales. Precise ones. With weights and records. Not chaotic. Structured. Columns. Ingredient. Mass. Processing temperature. Time. Result. He walked over to the table. He asked permission to look. Emily crossed her arms over her chest. She nodded. He read. 10 minutes. 15. She was brewing potions. Healing. Fortifying. Burn healing. And she wrote down every single one. Not like the alchemists in the guild who relied on their intuition about ingredients. A pinch of this and a handful of that. She weighed them. She measured the temperature. She timed it. She repeated the process. She compared the results. She looked for patterns. She did what any first-year chemistry student on Earth would call the experimental method. But in Erden, it didn't exist. She invented it herself. All by herself. In the basement. Ethan looked up. He looked at her. He took out a notebook. He said to Emily, "What you're describing is called chemistry in my home country. I have some bad news and some good news for you. The bad news is that you invented it all by yourself. The good news is that we'll finish inventing it together." Emily looked at him. He saw her face change, layer by layer. Anger, distrust, hope, fear that hope would let her down, and hope again. She began to cry, quietly. She covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. He stood there and waited. A minute later, she took her hands away. Her eyes were red. Her face was wet. She said that if he was watching, he'd better look away. He looked away. She blew her nose. Then she said in a harsh voice that she needed coffee, and so did he. She brewed coffee on a small burner. Her hands were still shaking, but her movements were precise. A professional habit. Her hands might tremble, but her dosing didn't. They drank coffee and talked for 4 hours. Ethan told her about acids and bases, about pH, about how a neutralization reaction releases heat, about how the reaction rate depends on temperature and concentration, about catalysts. She listened. She interrupted. She shouted, not out of anger, out of excitement. Every 10 minutes, she would jump up and run to her notes. She'd point to a line and say, "Here, this right here. I saw this but didn't know what to call it." Ethan would name it, and every time he gave a name to what she'd seen but couldn't describe, a little piece of the world fell into place for her. 10 years. For 10 years, she'd worked alone. For 10 years, people had called her crazy. For 10 years, she'd known she was right but couldn't prove it because she had no voice. Ethan gave her a voice. He offered to let her move into the workshop, 2nd floor, a separate corner for a lab, a salary of 30 kopecks a day. She said it wasn't enough. He said that was all he could offer right now. She said she agreed. Then she added that her coffee was part of the contract. He agreed. Emily moved in that same day. Her belongings fit into 2 bags. She carried the test tubes herself. She wrapped each one in cloth. She held each one as if it were a child. Haley looked at Emily. Emily looked at Haley. Haley looked away. Emily didn't. Wren shook her hand. Nora nodded. Kira asked what smelled so bad. Emily replied that it was science. So-Young looked at Emily appraisingly. She asked what her rank was. 67, Emily replied. Fire. So-Young nodded. They understood each other in 3 seconds. 2 mages among non-magical people, both rejected by the system that was supposed to support them. Lily brought some pastries. Emily ate 4. She said it was the best thing she'd eaten in 3 months. Lily brought more. The workshop was changing. With Emily came chemistry. Ethan knew the theory. Emily knew the practice. Together, they accomplished in 2 weeks what they couldn't have done separately in a year. The first result was simple: a potion stabilizer. A pinch of baking soda added to a healing brew at a specific stage of brewing halted the oxidation reaction, and the potion kept for not 3 days, but 3 weeks. Emily held the vial of stabilized potion in her hands and looked at it the way others look at their firstborn child. 10 years of work, thousands of attempts, and here it was, the result. Not accidental, predictable, reproducible. She set the vial on the shelf, turned to Ethan, told him that if he ever told anyone she'd been crying in the basement, she'd poison him. He said he wouldn't. She said, fine. Then she went to make coffee. The second result was more serious, a smoke mixture. Ethan described the principle. Emily gathered the ingredients. When lit, the mixture produced thick white smoke that lingered in the air for up to 10 minutes. Opaque, non-toxic. This was important for caravans. Smoke blocks the view. A mage can't strike what they can't see. A simple smoke screen. In a world where everyone relied on magical vision and magical protection, no one had thought of smoke. Ethan had. The third result appeared by accident. Emily was brewing yet another experimental concoction. Something went wrong. The flask heated up too quickly. Emily grabbed it with her bare hand and dropped it. The liquid spilled onto a metal plate. It sizzled, and the plate became covered with a thin layer of something. Matte. Durable. Ethan picked up the plate. He touched the coating. It was smooth. Hard. He tried to scratch it with a knife. The knife slid right off. He held the plate up to a candle. The coating didn't heat up. 10 seconds. 20. The plate remained cold. A heat-insulating coating. An accidental discovery. Like penicillin. He looked at Emily. She looked at the spilled liquid. They exchanged glances. She began writing down the formula from memory. He began testing the coating. By evening, they knew the formula could be replicated. By morning, they knew the coating adhered to copper, iron, and wood. By the next evening, Ethan had coated a new shield with it, a shield that didn't need to be dampened with felt, a shield that could withstand a direct hit from a jet of fire. Not for 6 seconds. 30. He sat in the workshop and looked at the shield. He thought. A coincidence. Always a coincidence. But a prepared mind seizes coincidences. An unprepared mind lets them pass by. Emily was brewing coffee and cursing the burn on her hand. Haley silently handed her a jar of ointment. The first ointment Haley had asked Emily to make. For her hands, because the sanding had made her skin crack. Emily made it, without a word. The workshop was becoming something more than just a workshop. The 6th month began with 2 caravans in a row. The first order was from Hawk. The second was from his competitor, who had learned that Hawk no longer lost any goods. Ethan no longer traveled with the caravans himself. He prepared the equipment and gave instructions. 2 shields with a heat-insulating coating. 4 smoke grenades. Instructions on a single sheet of paper, written in large handwriting. 5 points. When you see fire, put up the shield. Light a smoke grenade. Don't run. Wait behind the shield. When the fire stops, move forward. If the fire returns, repeat the process. Both caravans made it through without any losses. One wasn't even attacked. The mercenary mage saw the shields and decided not to get involved. Word of Kane's workshop spread like wildfire. Merchants, artisans, cart drivers, minor nobles without magical patronage. They all wanted the same thing, protection from magic without a mage. Ethan couldn't keep up. Orders were piling up. He was working 18-hour days. So was the team. Haley was polishing lenses for telescopes and sights. Ren built frames for the shields. Nora sewed covers and straps. Kira assembled the mechanisms. Emily brewed the coating in batches. Soyan tested every shield personally. They fired at it. They timed it. They recorded the results. Lily handled accounting and procurement. Megan managed security and delivery logistics. The money was flowing. For real. By the end of the 6th month, the workshop's account held 12 gold pieces, more than Ethan had ever seen in his entire life in this world. He didn't spend it on luxuries. It all went toward tools, materials, salaries, and toward one project he'd had in mind from day one, a textbook. He began writing it in the 4th month, notebook number 13, his first beyond his academic notes. He wrote simply for people without an education. Each chapter covered a single topic. Fire, what it is, why it burns, how to put it out, which materials burn, which don't, temperatures, fuel, oxygen, ice, what it is, why it's slippery, how it melts, what it does to metal, to wood, to stone. Lightning, what is it? Where does it strike? Why? How to protect yourself. Conductors, grounding. Each chapter ended with a practical section. What to do if a fireball is flying toward you. What to do if the road is covered in ice. What to do if lightning strikes nearby. No magic spells, physical actions, materials, tools, calculations. He wrote in the evenings. Lily read it. She pointed out what was unclear. He rewrote it. Megan read it. She pointed out where it was too long. He shortened it. Haley read it. She didn't say anything. But when she got to the chapter on optics, she pressed the notebook to her chest and wouldn't let go for half an hour. One evening, Ethan was sitting on the second floor, rewriting the chapter on thermal conductivity. The door downstairs slammed. Footsteps. Heavy. Unfamiliar. He went downstairs. A man was standing at the entrance. Tall, thin, about 50 years old, in a dark travel coat. Behind him were two men in identical gray jackets. Security. The man introduced himself as Bertrand Lowe, secretary to Count Aldrich of the Southern Province. Ethan waited. Lowe said that the Count had heard about Kane's workshop, about the shields, about the caravans, about the guy without mana. The Count wanted to offer a contract. Ethan asked what kind. Lowe explained. The Southern Province borders the wastelands. Shell dragons had been spotted 2 days' journey from the border. The Imperial Army is sending battle mages, but they're dying. 3 archmages in the last 6 months. Fire doesn't work. Ice doesn't work. Lightning doesn't work. Count Aldrich wants a different approach, to hire Kane's engineering corps to defend the southern border. Not to fight the dragons, to protect the population. Evacuation, fortifications, fire protection for buildings, smoke screens, anything that might help when the mages can't handle it. A 1-year contract, payment of 50 gold pieces a month plus the cost of materials. Ethan was silent. 50 gold pieces a month, that's a huge amount of money. With that money, he could set up a full-fledged workshop, hire people, buy everything he needed. But this was the south, far from Havenmark, and with dragons nearby. He asked if it was possible to work out of Havenmark and travel there as needed. Lowe said the Count would prefer to have a team on site, but it was negotiable. Ethan said he needed a week to decide. Lowe nodded. He left the papers with the terms and walked out. Ethan gathered the team that evening, all 7 of them, plus Lily and Megan. He laid the papers out on the workbench. He explained the offer. Silence. Soyeon was the first to speak. She said that Sheldrakes weren't like a mercenary fire mage. This was a whole different level. She'd seen the reports at the academy. 5 top-tier combat mages had died, mages whose pulse rates were over 100. If their fire couldn't take them down, what could the workshop possibly do? Ethan nodded. He said she was right. In direct combat against a dragon, they're powerless. But the contract isn't for combat, it's for protection. Fortify the houses, build shelters, ensure evacuation. It's an engineering task, not a military one. Emily asked about the scales. She'd heard that the scales were impenetrable. Ethan opened notebook number 7. He read aloud his old notes from the academy. The scales withstand fire, ice, and lightning, 3 different types of damage, 1 property that appears as 3. He still didn't know which one, but he wanted to find out, and for that he needed access to a dragon, alive or dead. The Southern Province provided that access. Ren asked if they were all leaving. Ethan said no. The workshop in Havenmark would remain. Ren and Nora are running it. Orders, shield production, training new employees. Soyeon, Emily, Haley, and Kira are going with him. Lily looked at him. He looked at her. She didn't ask. She said she was going too. It wasn't up for discussion. Someone has to make sure he eats and sleeps. Megan said it's more complicated with the city guard. She can't just leave, but she can take a leave of absence in a month and catch up with them. Ethan nodded. He wrote a reply to Lowe. Agreement. With conditions. The workshop in Havenmark remains. The corps is based in the Southern Province but has the right to relocate. Ethan has the right to request any materials and information, including the bodies of slain dragons. Lowe replied 3 days later. The Count agreed to all the conditions. The body of a smaller-sized shell dragon would be provided upon the corps' arrival. Ethan read the reply. He looked at Soyeon. She was standing by the window, gazing south, somewhere beyond the rooftops, beyond the horizon. Somewhere out there, creatures that devoured magic roamed, and the mages couldn't stop them. Maybe a physicist could. Ethan packed his suitcase, the same one, with the notebooks, only now there were 13 notebooks. The journey south took 6 days. Ethan rode in a wagon with Lily and Haley. Soyeon rode on horseback. Emily was in a second wagon with the lab equipment. Kira drove the horses. The Southern Province greeted them with heat, dry, dusty, The air shimmered above the road. The earth was red, clay-like. The trees were short, thorn-covered. The town of Southmore stood on a hill 20 kilometers from the border with the wastelands. Stone walls, 4 towers, a garrison of 100 soldiers and 12 mages. Count Uldric received them in the town hall. A man of about 60, gray-haired, lean, with the hands of a man who, in his youth, had wielded a sword rather than a quill. He looked at Ethan, at his glasses, at his thin shoulders, at the girls behind him. He didn't voice any doubts, but his eyes said it all. He had expected something else. Ethan didn't try to convince him. He asked to see the dragon's body. The Count nodded. An officer led them outside the city walls, 1/2 kilometer to the north. There, in a dry ravine, lay the corpse of a shelldrake. Young, small by dragon standards, 4 meters from nose to tail, 2 meters at the withers. It had been killed 3 weeks ago. 2 archmages and 16 battle mages had spent 4 hours on it. 1 archmage had died. The second lost an arm. The dragon didn't die from magic. It died when a rocky slope collapsed and buried it. Magic did nothing. The rocks did everything. Ethan approached the carcass. He knelt down. He looked. Scales, gray, dull, plates the size of a palm, overlapping like roof tiles. He touched them, smooth, cool, unexpectedly light. He took out a knife, tried to scratch the surface. The knife slipped, not a scratch. He tried pressing harder. The knife slipped and cut his finger. The scales weren't even scratched. He took a magnifying glass out of his bag. Haley had polished a lens specifically for this occasion. 20 times magnification. He held the magnifying glass up to the scales, and he saw it. The surface wasn't smooth. It was structured. Thousands of tiny grooves, parallel, perfectly even. The distance between the grooves was uniform. He changed the angle. Light danced across the surface. The grooves ran in a specific direction, not randomly, organized, like a crystal lattice. He took notes, quickly, in small handwriting. The surface structure is regular. The repeating period of the grooves was about 1/10 of a millimeter to the eye. The direction was from the center of the plate to the edges, radial. He moved to the edge of the plate, where one plate overlapped another. The joint, thin, flexible, without scales. Skin, soft, vulnerable. He poked it with a knife. The knife went in, easily, just like ordinary skin. He made a note. The joints between the plates are unprotected, vulnerability. The joint is approximately 2 centimeters wide. The length depends on the size of the plates. Access is difficult due to the overlapping plates, but with the right angle of impact, it's achievable. He spent 4 hours with the corpse, measuring, recording, sketching. He asked Soyan to strike the scales with a stream of fire. She struck. The scales didn't heat up. At all. Ethan kept his hand on a plate 3 seconds after the strike. It was cold, as if there had been no fire at all. He asked her to strike it with ice. Soyan created an ice crystal and hurled it at the scale. The crystal shattered. The scale remained undamaged. And it didn't cool down. Ethan measured the temperature. It was the same as before the strike. He asked her to strike it with lightning. Soyan warned him that it was dangerous to stand nearby. He stepped back 10 meters. She struck. The discharge ran through the scales and into the ground. The scales didn't even darken. Ethan walked over. He measured the temperature. It was the same. He sat down on a rock next to the corpse. He thought, 3 types of effects. Thermal energy is absorbed, mechanical kinetic energy is reflected, electrical energy is conducted and dissipates into the ground. 3 different processes, but one property. Which one? He closed his eyes. He thought. Grooves on the surface, a regular pattern, a period of 1/10 of a millimeter radiating outward from the center. It reminded him of something. He knew it, from somewhere in a past life. A diffraction grating. No, not exactly, but close. a structure that interacts with energy on a microscopic level, redirects it, scatters it, absorbs it. He jumped up, opened his notebook, began to write, quickly. If the scales have a microstructure that interacts with magical energy, then they don't reflect magic. They absorb it, redirect it into its own structure. A mage strikes with fire and the scales absorb the thermal energy. A mage strikes with lightning and the scales conduct the electrical energy. A mage strikes with ice and the kinetic energy is absorbed by the structure. But the energy doesn't disappear, it goes somewhere. He returned to the corpse. He looked more closely. At the junction of the scales and the joint was a thin strip of tissue, a different color, dark red, almost black. He cut it open. Inside were channels, thin ones, like capillaries, filled with a thick liquid. He took a sample. He brought it to Emily. She looked at it under a magnifying glass. She said it looked like blood, but not quite. Thicker, darker, with a metallic sheen. He told her to check the composition, whatever she could. She nodded and went into the tent they'd set up nearby. Ethan returned to the corpse. He thought. The channels ran from the scales deep into the body. The energy absorbed by the scales was transmitted through the channels inward. Where to? He began the autopsy, carefully, methodically. 3 hours of work. Soyeon helped. She held the ribs, she parted the tissues, she didn't flinch. The Academy's combat program included anatomy. She'd seen internal organs before. Ethan found what he was looking for. In the center of the chest, between the lungs and the heart, was an organ, about the size of 2 fists, solid, heavy, perforated by the same channels that ran from the scales. He cut it open. Inside was the same dark liquid, but here it was hot. 3 weeks after the dragon's death, this organ was still warm. He sat down, set down the knife, stared at the organ. Thought. Energy is absorbed by the scales. It's transmitted through the channels. It accumulates in the central organ. The dragon isn't just protected from magic, the dragon feeds on it. The harder a mage strikes, the more energy the dragon receives. Its scales aren't armor, they're a digestive system. For magic. He looked at Soyeon. She was standing nearby, listening to his mutterings. She understood before he even said it out loud. Her face went pale. She said that meant every mage who attacked the dragon was feeding it, that the 5 archmages who had died over the past year had died because they'd made the dragon stronger with their own attacks. Ethan nodded. Exactly. She asked how to kill it. He said the answer was right in front of them. The joints, the soft tissue between the plates, unprotected, vulnerable to a physical blow, not a magical one, a physical one, a knife, a spear, an arrow, anything with enough kinetic energy aimed at the right spot. But the dragon is agile, fast. To hit a joint 2 centimeters wide, you need precision, and you need the dragon to be slow, or motionless, or at least weakened. How do you weaken a dragon that feeds on magic? Stop feeding it. Stop casting spells, period, near it. Without a flow of magical energy, its metabolism will slow down. It will become lethargic, slow, predictable, and then a precise strike to the joint. He wrote it down. The plan was simple, desperately simple. Don't attack with magic. Strike with a spear. 2 actions that no mage in Erden would even consider. Because not attacking with magic is surrender, and striking with a spear is barbarism. To a man with 0 pulses, it was obvious. He closed his notebook. He looked south. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the gray vault was flying. The largest dragon in history. 20 meters long according to observers' estimates. A 3-day flight from the southern provinces. Ethan had no intention of killing it tomorrow. He was going to prepare. As always. Calculations, blueprints, prototypes, tests. That takes time. Months, maybe a year. But now he knew the principle. And the principle is 90% of the work. The first 2 weeks in Southmoor were spent getting organized. Count Aldrich had allocated a barracks building near the northern wall to the core. A solid building, 2 stories, dry, with a blacksmith shop in the courtyard. Ethan laid out the space in a single day. The first floor would be the workshop and storage area. The second floor would house Emily's lab and Haley's optics room. Kira took over the blacksmith shop. She had learned to forge basic parts during her 3 months in Havenmark and now worked with confidence. Soyeon trained in the courtyard every morning without magic. Ethan had asked her to. Near the border of the wasteland, any release of mana could attract attention. She switched to sword training and physical conditioning. She didn't complain. She understood. Lily took over a small room next to the kitchen and, in 3 days, turned the barracks into a livable space. Curtains on the windows, a schedule on the wall, hot meals twice a day. Ethan didn't ask. She just did it. On the 3rd day, Ethan began working on a weapon, not on shields, on a means of killing a dragon.
The task was specific.
To drive a sharp object into the joint between the scales at a speed sufficient to pierce the skin and muscle tissue to a depth of at least 15 centimeters. A joint 2 centimeters wide. On a moving target. From a distance that ensures the shooter's safety. He spent 3 days thinking it over. He filled 8 pages with notes. A bow wouldn't work. Insufficient accuracy at the required distance. Neither would a standard crossbow. The bolt is too light. It won't penetrate 15 centimeters. A heavy projectile is needed. A spear. But the spear must be thrown with an accuracy of 2 centimeters at a distance of 20 to 30 meters. A human hand cannot achieve that level of accuracy. So a mechanism is needed. A crossbow-style mechanism, but not an ordinary one, a reinforced one, with a guide rail 1.5 meters long to stabilize the flight, with a tensioning system based on a steel cable and pulleys. He began to sketch. A spear 1 meter 20 long, a steel tip, narrow, 4-sided, like a stiletto, 2 centimeters in diameter at the base, an ash shaft, lightweight, durable, 3 stabilizers at the tail, leather, an oak crossbow frame with iron reinforcements. The bowstring is a steel cable. Tension is applied via a system of 2 pulleys. The trigger force is about 200 kilograms. The spear's muzzle velocity is approximately 40 meters per second. The kinetic energy is sufficient to penetrate 20 centimeters. With room to spare. He worked on it for a week. He reworked it 3 times. Each time he found a flaw. The frame was too heavy. The guide rail was too long. The tensioning mechanism was too complicated. On the 4th try, it worked. A mechanical crossbow. He gave it a simple name, the spear launcher. It weighs 20 kilograms. It requires 2 people to operate. One aims, the other loads it. Reload time, 30 seconds. Effective range, 40 meters. Accuracy with proper aiming, plus or minus 1.5 centimeters. Enough to hit a 2 centimeter joint, but only under ideal conditions. A stationary target, no wind. A skilled marksman. He needed a scope. He called Haley. He explained the task. An optical scope with 2 lenses and 4 times magnification, featuring a reticle for aiming. She listened in silence. Then she asked what lens diameter was needed. He said 40 millimeters. She nodded and went back to her room. 4 days later, the scope was ready. 2 achromatic lenses, no color distortion, a clear image at a distance of up to 100 meters, a reticle made of the finest copper wire. Ethan mounted the scope on a spear. He went out into the yard. He hung a target on the wall, a circle with a black dot in the center. The dot was 2 centimeters in diameter. Distance, 30 meters. First shot. The spear went 20 centimeters to the right. Recoil. He hadn't accounted for it. Second shot after adjusting. 10 centimeters to the left. Wind. Third. 5 centimeters higher. Fourth. Hit the edge of the dot. Fifth. Center. He made a note of it. 5 shots for sight-in. Acceptable. But in combat, there won't be 5 shots. There'll be 1, maybe 2. He needs a shooter who can hit it on the first try. He looked at Soyeon. She was standing by the wall, watching. He handed her the spear gun. She took it. She was used to the weight. She raised it, looked through the scope. First shot. 3 centimeters off-center. Ethan looked at her. She wasn't surprised. She was focused. Second shot. Bullseye. Third. Bullseye. Fourth. Bullseye. She lowered the spear gun and looked at Ethan. He said, "Good." She said that the scope was the best thing she'd ever seen in her life, that the world looked different through the optics, that for the first time she could see exactly where her shot was going instead of relying on intuition. Ethan nodded. He said she needed to practice every day, 20 shots, at different distances, in different weather conditions, with and without wind. She began to train, every day. Kira forged new arrowheads. Wren in Havenmark built spare stocks based on the blueprints Ethan had sent by courier. Nora sewed carrying straps and scopes covers. Megan arrived 3 weeks later, with her leave papers and a bag of provisions from the landlady of the Copper Mug Tavern. She inspected the barracks. She inspected the courtyard. She inspected the fence. She said the security was useless. In 2 days, she organized the perimeter, guard rotations, a signaling system, and patrol routes. Ethan didn't interfere. This was her territory. Alongside the spear launcher, Ethan worked on the second part of the plan, a super-cooling mixture. He and Emily conducted dozens of experiments. They needed a compound that, upon contact with the dragon's scales, would drastically lower their temperature. The scales absorbed magical energy, but physical cooling isn't magic. It's heat exchange. If the scales were cooled quickly enough and sufficiently, they would become brittle. Any material loses its plasticity when subjected to extreme cooling. It becomes brittle, fragile. Emily developed the formula in 3 weeks, a mixture of saltpeter and 4 other components that absorbed heat when dissolved in water, an endothermic reaction. The mixture's temperature dropped to -30 in 20 seconds. Not cryogenic temperatures, but enough for a start. They tested it on a sample of scales from a dragon's carcass. Ethan poured the mixture over the plate. He waited 30 seconds. He struck it with a hammer. The plate cracked. It didn't split, it cracked. A small crack running from the edge to the center. He made a note. It works, partially. It needs to be colder, or longer, or more of the mixture. Emily strengthened the formula. Second attempt, -45. The plate split with a single blow. He sat on the ground next to the split scale of the shell dragon and, for the first time in 2 years in this world, allowed himself to think. Maybe it'll work. The gray vault had been spotted 2 days' flight from the southern border. A mounted courier from the border post brought the report. The dragon was moving south. Slowly, but it was moving. It was enormous. Witnesses reported it was 20 meters long. Its wingspan was 40. Its shadow covered an entire village. 3 villages in its path had been evacuated. 2 were burned. Not by the dragon's fire. Mages of the Imperial Army had tried to stop it, and their fire destroyed the houses. The dragon escaped unharmed. 2 archmages died. 1 went missing. Ethan received the report that morning. He read it. He set it on the table. He looked at the map of the southern province hanging on the wall. 2 days' flight is roughly 400 kilometers. At a speed of about 30 kilometers per hour above the ground, the dragon will reach Southmoor in 13 to 14 days. If it doesn't change course. If it doesn't stop to feed. If the Imperial mages continue to attack it, and they will, then it will be well fed and fast. Ethan gathered a team. He explained the situation. 2 weeks, maybe less. The spear launcher is ready. The mixture is ready. Soyan shoots consistently. But that was a training yard with a target on the wall, not a 20-meter dragon in an open field. The difference between them is like the difference between a calculation on paper and a real bridge. A bridge can collapse. He had to solve 3 problems. First, delivering the mixture. A 20-meter dragon means at least 20 square meters of scales. To cool a sufficient area, about 50 liters of the mixture are needed. 50 liters per dragon in the air. Impossible. So the dragon must be on the ground. Dragons land when they're feeding, when they're resting, when they sense prey. Magical prey. That's where the problem arose. Ethan wanted the mages to stop casting spells. But if the mages stopped casting spells, the dragon wouldn't land. It would fly right past. We need bait, a controlled source of magical energy that would force the dragon to land in the right spot, and one that could be turned off at the right moment. He looked at Soyan. She understood. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers on the sword hilt turned white. He said she didn't have to do it, that they could find another mage. She said another mage wouldn't know physics, wouldn't understand what they were doing, wouldn't control mana expenditure down to the last %. She was the only mage who could regulate the output, turn it on, turn it off, on command. She'll go. It's not up for discussion. Ethan nodded. The second problem, delivering the mixture to the scales, 50 liters. The dragon is on the ground, but you can't get close to it. Its tail swings a range of 5 meters, its mouth, 7. It has to be done remotely. He thought about it for 2 days. On the third day, he came up with a solution. A catapult. Not a siege catapult, a small one, a lever-type catapult, with a counterweight. It launches clay vessels filled with liquid up to 30 meters. The vessels shatter on impact, and the mixture spreads across the scales. We'll need 6 vessels, 8 liters each. The catapult's accuracy is plus or minus 3 meters. For a target 20 meters in size, that's acceptable. He began building it. Kira forged the axles and fasteners. Ren sent the frame parts from Havenmark. Ethan assembled the mechanism himself. They conducted the tests on the 4th day. A vessel filled with water. A distance of 25 meters. First throw. Hit. The vessel shattered. The water splashed over an area of 3 square meters. That was enough. The third problem was a human one. The Imperial Army wouldn't listen to a boy without mana. The 12 mages from the Southmoor garrison and the 12.5 battle mages from the capital, whom they'd send to intercept them, wouldn't stop casting spells at the request of the bespectacled watchmaker. He needed authority. He went to Count Aldry. He sat down across from him. He placed a dragon scale on the table, a cracked one. The Count looked at it. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at Ethan. Ethan explained everything, from start to finish. The scale absorbs magic. The dragon feeds on it. Every blow from a mage makes it stronger. The only way to kill it is to stop casting spells and strike it physically, at a joint, after it has cooled down. He showed him the spear launcher. He showed him the mixture. He showed him the calculations. The Count listened for 40 minutes. He didn't interrupt. When Ethan finished, the Count remained silent for another 5 minutes. Then he stood up. He walked over to the window. He looked north. He said he'd lost his son. 2 months ago. His son was one of the mages sent to intercept the dragon at the northern outposts. 89 pulses. A fire mage, like all the others. He pounded the dragon with everything he had. The dragon swallowed his fire and crushed him with its tail. The Count turned to Ethan. There were no tears in his eyes, only emptiness. He said he would order the garrison's mages not to cast spells, that he would write to the commander of the Imperial Corps personally, that he would include the dragon's scales and calculations, that he didn't know if they would listen to him, but he would try. Ethan stood up. He said he was sorry about his son. The Count nodded. He said that if the plan worked, his son would not have died in vain, because the next boy with 89 pulses wouldn't climb onto a dragon with his bare hands. Ethan walked out of City Hall. He stood on the steps. The wind carried the scent of dust from the south. He wasn't thinking about the plan. He was thinking about how the Count had lost his son, because in 2,000 years, no one had asked a simple question. Why doesn't magic work against dragons? Everyone knew it didn't work. No one asked why, and people died, year after year. He adjusted his glasses. He went to the barracks. There was enough work for 10 days. The dragon had given them 12. The Grey Vault had been spotted 2 weeks' journey from Southmoor. Ethan devised a 3-stage plan. Soyon would act as bait to lure the dragon down. A catapult would deliver a supercooled mixture onto its scales. A spear launcher with an optical sight would strike at a joint. Count Uldric, who had lost his son in battle against a dragon, agreed to order the mages not to cast spells. 10 days passed in a flash. Ethan slept 4 hours a day. The rest of the time he worked. The catapult was assembled and tested. 20 test launches, 18 hits within the target zone. 90%. Acceptable. The spear thrower was inspected and lubricated. Soyon fired it every day, 20 shots. The hit rate on a 2-centimeter target at 30 meters was 95%. At 40 meters, 80%. At 50 meters, 60%. Ethan decided that the maximum combat range was 35 meters. Beyond that, the risk of missing was too high. Emily brewed 100 liters of the supercooling mixture, a double supply, just in case the first volley didn't cover a large enough area. Haley made a spare sight, identical to the first one, just in case the main one broke. Kira forged 12 spearheads, 3 main ones, 9 spares. Nora sewed protective suits, thick fabric with Emily's heat-insulating coating, not against magic, against the cold of the mixture and accidental fire. Lily set up a field camp, tents, supplies, water, medications, bandages, 5 days' worth of food. Megan devised an evacuation plan for Southmore. 3 routes, 12 assembly points, signal fires on the walls. She presented the plan to the Count, and he approved it without any changes. On the 8th day, a reply arrived from the commander of the Imperial Corps. The letter was brief. The commander expressed skepticism. But Count Uldric carried enough weight at court that his word carried more weight than the general skepticism. The order read, Imperial mages arriving in the southern province are to come under the tactical command of Count Ald for the duration of the operation. This meant that the Count could order them not to cast spells, and they would have to obey, formally. Ethan knew that formally and in practice were 2 different things. A mage accustomed to unleashing fire at the sight of a dragon would unleash fire. Instinct. 12 years of training. Reflexes. A single order wasn't enough. An explanation was needed. He gathered the garrison's mages and the arriving Imperial detachment at City Hall. 18 mages. 4 of them were of the highest rank, above 80 pulses. Ethan stood before them. Short, thin, wearing glasses, without mana. No title, no rank. He placed a cracked dragon scale on the table. He explained, simply, without scientific terms. The scale absorbs magic. The more you strike it, the stronger the dragon becomes. If you want to kill the dragon, don't strike it. There was silence for the first 10 seconds. Then one of the high-ranking mages stood up. He called it nonsense. He said the Academy had definitively established that dragons possess spiritual defenses, that the solution lies in strengthening the spiritual potential of the attack, that we need more mages, not fewer. Ethan didn't argue. He turned to Soyon. He nodded. Soyon raised her hand. A fireball the size of an apple hovered above her palm. She brought it close to the scale on the table. The fire touched the scale. And nothing happened. The scale remained cold. The mages watched. Soyon increased the power. The fireball grew to the size of a head. The temperature in the hall spiked. The flame licked at the scale. The scale didn't heat up by even a single degree. Ethan placed his palm on the back of the scale. Demonstratively. It was cold. He withdrew his hand. Then he took a bucket of supercooling mixture and poured it over the scale. It hissed. Steam. Cold. 30 seconds later, he raised the hammer and struck. The scale split in 2. The pieces fell onto the table. The hall fell silent. The mage who had objected sat down. Slowly. Ethan said he wasn't asking them to believe him. He was asking them not to cast any spells for 2 hours. If the dragon was still alive after 2 hours, they could hit it with whatever they wanted. But they had to give him 2 hours. The Count stood up and confirmed the order. 2 hours. Not a single spell within a 2-kilometer radius of the dragon. The mages nodded. Not all of them willingly, but they nodded. On the 11th day, a scout brought a report. The Grey Vault was a day's journey away, heading straight south, towards Southmoor. Ethan unfolded the map on the table. He had chosen the battle site in advance. A flat valley 10 kilometers north of the city. Open. No cover for the men, but also no ravines where the dragon could trap them. A level surface for the catapult. Good visibility for aiming. A steady west wind. 3 meters per second. Wind correction for the spear, 0.7 centimeters at 30 meters. He marked the positions on the map. The catapult in the center. The javelin launcher 100 meters to the south on a small hill. Soyon as bait 300 meters north of the catapult. Imperial mages are behind the 2-kilometer line. Civilians have been evacuated. He looked at the map and thought, what had he overlooked? What could go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. The dragon might not land. The mixture might not work on live scales the same way it does on dead ones. The spear might miss. It might not penetrate deep enough. Soyon might not have time to get out of the way. The wind might change. A 30% margin of error. The same 30% as with the first caravan. Only the stakes are 1,000 times higher. He closed his eyes, exhaled, opened them, looked at his team. Lily was packing the medical supplies. Soyon was cleaning her sword. Haley was wiping the scope with a soft cloth, gently, as if it were a living creature. Emily was checking the containers of the mixture for leaks. Kira was sharpening the tips. Nora was adjusting the straps on the protective suits. Megan stood by the door, gazing out into the night, on guard duty, as always. These people had come for him, not for money, not for fame, for him, because he was the first person in their lives to tell them they weren't broken. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. He opened his notebook. He checked the calculations one more time, from the very beginning, down to the last digit. It was a clear morning, not a cloud in sight. A west wind blowing at 3 meters per second, just as in the calculations. Ethan stood on the hill next to the spear launcher and looked north. Soyon was beside him, wearing a protective suit, a sword at her belt. Her face was calm. She wasn't afraid. Or perhaps she was, but she didn't show it. Ethan didn't ask. Down in the valley, Kira and 2 soldiers from the garrison were setting up the catapult. 6 clay vessels filled with a supercooling mixture stood in a row nearby. Emily was checking them one last time. She weighed each one. She inspected each one. Haley sat on the hill, holding a spare sight on her lap. It was wrapped in 3 layers of cloth. Nora stood nearby with a set of tools in case the spear thrower jammed. Lily was at the field camp a kilometer to the south, with medications, with water, with a wagon for the wounded. Megan was in charge of the perimeter, a 2-kilometer radius, not a single mage inside. Just Kane's unit and 20 non-magical soldiers from the garrison. Count Aldrich stood at the southern edge of the perimeter, watching, waiting. They were all waiting. An hour passed. 2. The sun was rising. The heat. Dust. Ethan drank water in small sips. He didn't take his eyes off the horizon. At the 3rd hour, Haley said quietly, "There." Ethan looked, to the north, above the horizon. A dot. Dark.
It was growing.
Slowly. Steadily. 10 minutes later, he saw its wings. 20 minutes later, the outline of its body. 30 minutes later, its shadow. It moved across the ground ahead of the dragon. Huge. It covered the field like a thundercloud. The Grey Vault. It was bigger than in the reports. Not 20 meters, 25, maybe 30. Its wings were wide, heavy. Each flap kicked up dust from the ground for half a kilometer around. Its scales were gray, dull, like stone. Its eyes were yellow. Even from a kilometer away, Ethan could see them. Unblinking, scanning the ground. The dragon was searching. It was hungry. The mages hadn't attacked it for 2 days. Not since it had entered the Count's command zone. 2 days without magical energy. For a creature accustomed to a constant flow, it was like 2 days without food. It slowed down. It descended. He was flying at an altitude of 100 meters. It was time. Ethan turned to Soyan. She nodded. She descended the hill. She stepped out into the valley, 300 meters north of the catapult. Alone. In an open field. A small figure in a protective suit. She stopped, raised her hands, and ignited it. Not a fireball. A pillar of flame, 5 meters high, bright, scorching, visible for kilometers. A burst of magical energy, like a lighthouse, like the smell of food to the hungry. The dragon noticed. Its head turned, its yellow eyes locked onto the target. It changed course. It began its descent, straight towards Soyan. Ethan calculated. Descent rate, angle, time to impact. 3 minutes. 2. 1. The dragon was at an altitude of 50 meters. 30. 20. It was coming in for a landing. Its wings spread wide. The air hummed. Dust rose in a wall. Soyan stood there. The flame was burning. Ethan shouted, "Now!" Soyan extinguished the flame, instantly, and she ran, south, toward the catapult. The dragon landed. The impact shook the ground. Ethan felt it across the hill, 200 meters to the landing site. The dragon stood on 4 legs, head raised. It was searching for the energy source. It couldn't find it. The source had gone out. It was confused. 3 seconds. 5. Ethan shouted to Kira, "Fire!" The catapult fired. The first vessel soared into the air. An arc, 30 meters. A direct hit. The clay vessel shattered against the dragon's back. The liquid spread across its scales. It hissed. White steam. The dragon flinched, not from pain, but from surprise. It didn't understand what was happening. This wasn't magic. This wasn't an attack. It was just cold liquid. The second vessel. Hit. Left side. Third. Base of the neck. Fourth. Miss. It flew over its back, shattered on the ground. Fifth. Right side. Sixth. Tail. 5 out of 6. 83%. The dragon stood in a cloud of white steam. The mixture was working. The temperature of its scales was dropping. The plates were covered with frost. The dragon roared, a sound that made his ears ring, low, vibrating. It spread its wings. It wanted to take flight. Ethan was counting. 30 seconds since the first hit. The mixture needs seconds to take full effect. 10 more. The dragon must not take flight. Soyan. She stopped halfway to the catapult, turned around, raised her hand. A brief flash of flame, faint, for 3 seconds, enough for the dragon to notice. He noticed. His head turned toward her. He took a step, heavy, slow. The cold was taking its toll. His movements were slowing, not from weakness, from fragility. His scales cracked with every movement. The small plates at his joints were popping. He took a second step. A third. 40 seconds. Ethan shouted, "Soyan, run!" She extinguished the fire and ran. The dragon stepped after her, and its front left paw buckled. The scales at the knee joint burst. A crack ran through the plate. It staggered, fell to one knee, growled, louder. Ethan was already at the spear thrower. His hands moved on their own. The sight. He aimed. The dragon was 220 meters away. Far. Too far. The spear thrower's effective range was 40 meters. He needed to get closer. He looked at Soyan. She was running toward him. 100 meters between her and the dragon. The dragon was getting to its feet. Slowly, with difficulty. But it was getting up. Ethan removed the spear gun from its mount. 20 kilograms. Heavy. He ran down the hill, toward the valley, toward the dragon. Soyan saw him. Her eyes widened. She shouted for him to stop. He didn't stop. 150 meters to the dragon. 100. 70. 50. He stopped. He set the spear launcher on the ground. His hands were shaking. He was out of breath. Sweat was streaming into his eyes under his goggles. He wiped the lenses. He raised the spear launcher. He took aim.
The dragon stood 40 meters away, huge, gray, shrouded in a cloud of frost and steam. Its scales were covered in cracks. The joints were exposed, dark strips of unprotected skin between the plates. 2, 5, 8 visible points. He chose the largest one, the base of the neck, the joint between the head plate and the dorsal crest. 3 centimeters wide, a dark strip of skin. He aimed the crosshairs. His hands were shaking. The spear would miss. He wasn't a marksman. He was an engineer. He designed weapons, not fired them. Someone nearby fell to their knees. Soyeon. She had run up. Breathing heavily, she looked at the spear launcher. She looked at him. She held out her hands. He handed it over, without a word. She picked up the spear launcher. 20 kilograms in her hands felt like 5. She pressed it to her shoulder. She looked through the sight. 1 second. 2. The dragon was raising its head. It opened its jaws. Ethan saw a flicker inside. Not fire, something else. Magical energy accumulated over months of being fed by Imperial mages. The dragon was preparing to strike. 3. Soyeon fired. The spear whizzed through the air. Straight, precise, as if along a ruler. 40 meters per second. 1 meter in 1/40th of a second. A 3-centimeter wide joint in its neck. A direct hit. The spear pierced the dark strip of skin between the scales, right up to the feathering. 60 centimeters of steel and ash wood embedded in the dragon's body. Greyvault froze. Its yellow eyes came to a halt. The glimmer in its mouth faded. It stood for another 3 seconds. Then its front legs buckled. Its head dropped. Slowly, heavily, like a falling tower. It lay down on the ground. It sighed, one long, heavy sigh, and fell silent. Silence. Absolute. No wind, no cry, not a sound. Ethan stood 40 meters from the dead dragon. Next to him was Soyeon, on her knees, holding an empty spear gun in her hands. She didn't move. Neither did he. Then Emily appeared from behind the hill, running. Behind her was Kira. Behind them was Haley. Haley was carrying a spare scope, clutching it to her chest. Not unnecessary. 1 shot was enough. Ethan sat down on the ground. His legs wouldn't hold him up. He took a notebook out of his pocket. He opened it to the last page. There was the impact angle calculation. It wasn't finished. He took out a pencil. His hand was shaking. He finished the last line. The angle of penetration was 12 degrees from the normal. Depth, 60 centimeters. Enough. He closed the notebook, adjusted his glasses, looked up at the sky. Clear. Not a cloud in sight. Wind at 3 meters per second from the west. Just as calculated. The morning after the battle was quiet. Fog lay over the valley. Thick. White. The body of the gray vault loomed through it like the silhouette of a mountain. Long. Dark. Motionless. Imperial mages stood around it, silently. They had arrived at dawn when the cordon was lifted. They stood in a circle and watched. They couldn't believe it. One of them approached the carcass. He touched a scale. He felt the cracks. He found a spear sticking out of the neck. He felt the shaft. He turned to his comrades. His face bore an expression Ethan had seen before. The expression on Haley's face when she first made a perfect lens. The look on Lily's face when the mill started working. The look on Megan's face when her notes turned out not to be nonsense. The look of a person whose world had just been turned upside down. Ethan was sitting on a hillside 50 meters from the dragon. He was holding a mug of tea. Lily had brought it. Hot. Sweet. She stood nearby. She didn't say a word. She just stood there.
Soyeon sat behind him, polishing the spear thrower, methodically, part by part, just as she polished her sword every evening. Now she had two weapons, one magical, one not. Haley sat a little to the side, checking the sight lenses. Not a single one was cracked. She was smiling, quietly, to herself, but she was smiling. Emily was standing by the carcass, yelling at the assistant from the garrison who was helping her collect scale samples. The guy kept dropping the vials. She was yelling, a familiar sound. So everything was fine. Kira sat by the catapult, sharpening her knife. Not because the knife was dull, because her hands needed to be busy. She still hadn't gotten used to the idea that they'd done it. Megan stood on the perimeter, on guard duty, as always, even now, even after the victory, because there was no time to relax. There was never time. A young man in imperial livery approached Ethan, a messenger, a courier's bag slung over his shoulder, an official figure. He bowed. He took a small wooden box out of the bag. He opened it. Inside was an order ribbon, gold with a silver border, the Order of the Crown for military valor. Next to the ribbon lay a scroll. The messenger read aloud. His Imperial Majesty highly values the merits of Master Ethan Kane. His Majesty offers Master Kane the title of Baron and an estate in the southern province. His Majesty awaits Master Kane at court for the award ceremony. Ethan listened. He looked at the box. He looked at his notebook, the last line of the calculation. Unfinished. No, finished. Yesterday, on the battlefield. He closed his notebook. He looked at the messenger. He said calmly, "Tell His Majesty that I am grateful, but I need to finish writing something. Otherwise, the next dragon will go to someone who doesn't have my notes. The order is to be given to Soyeon Khan. She was the one who landed the blow." The messenger opened his mouth, closed it. He took out a pen and paper. Ethan continued, "And please convey one more request to the Leaf Spire Academy." The messenger wrote it down. "Have them include physics in the first-year curriculum. That's all. Thank you." The messenger put away his pen. He bowed. He left. Soyeon approached. She had heard everything. Ethan looked at her. He said the medal was hers. She said the medal belonged to everyone. He said there was room for only one name on the ribbon, and that name was Soyeon Han. She wanted to argue. She didn't. She nodded. She sheathed her spear gun. She stood beside him, silently. The fog began to lift. The sun broke through the white veil. The dragon's body became fully visible. 25 meters of gray stone, cracked from the cold, with a single spear lodged in its neck. The first dragon killed without magic. The final question that would remain in the textbooks: how to stop that which devours power. Stop giving it power. A simple answer. For 1,000 years, no one had figured it out. 3 days later, Kane's ship returned to Southmoor. Count Aldrich met them at the gates, in person. He shook Ethan's hand, then Soyeon, then each member of the team, every single one. He didn't skip a single person. When he reached Haley, she handed him a small package, a spare scope. The Count looked at her. She said quietly that it was a gift, that the city could use some good optics, for watching the horizon. The Count accepted the gift. His eyes glistened, not from tears, from something else. A week later, an imperial decree arrived, an official one, on letterhead, with a seal, regarding a review of the Zammer system. The decree ordered the creation of a commission of mages and non-magical experts to study alternative forms of assessing abilities. The measurement using an artifact remained in place, but it was no longer the sole criterion. Next to the decree on the measurement lay a second decree, on the creation of a new department at the Leaf Spire Academy, the Department of Applied Natural Philosophy. Ethan read both decrees. He set them down on the table. Lily asked how he felt. He thought for a moment. He said he felt like he needed to buy more notebooks. She laughed, for the first time in a long time. Not just out of politeness, for real. A month later, they returned to Havenmark. The workshop was still there. Ren and Nora were running it flawlessly. There were so many orders that they'd hired 4 more people. The sign was still the same. Kane, clocks, locks, and strange questions. Lily said it was time to change the sign. Ethan said there was no need. This one was just right. Life had settled into a rhythm. Mornings at the workshop, afternoons handling orders, evenings with notebooks.
Nights filled with conversations. With Lily about what to have for breakfast. With Soyeon about how to improve the spear launcher. With Haley about the properties of the new glass. With Emily about the chemical reactions she discovered last week. With Kira about the design of a new furnace. With Nora about calculating fabric strength. With Ren about which type of wood is best for what. With Megan about how trade with the North had begun to recover. 2 months after his return, Ethan received a letter from the Leaf Spire Academy. He was invited to give a lecture to the freshmen, just one, as an outside expert. He went, alone. The hall was full. 200 freshmen, robes, young faces, mages, future mages. He stood at the lectern, the same hall where 12 years ago he had sat in gray, writing down other people's spells. He began simply. He said that fire is not the passion of the soul, that ice is not the breath of winter, that lightning is not the wrath of the heavens, that all of this is physics. Beautiful, complex, amazing, but physics. And that if they want to become not just powerful mages, but great ones, they need to know exactly what they're doing when they cast spells. He spoke for an hour, without a break, without notes, from memory, 12 notebooks in his head. When he finished, the room was silent for 5 seconds. Then a student in the back row raised his hand, a boy, about 14, thin, pale, in a gray shirt, not white like the rest, gray, empty. He'd been allowed into the lecture because a new decree permitted it. He asked in a quiet voice, "Can I learn this too, even if I have few pulses?" Ethan looked at him. He saw himself, 12 years ago, on the cold floor, barefoot, with a dead crystal ball hanging over his head. He said, "Especially if you have few pulses." The boy nodded. Ethan left the hall. He walked down the hallway, past the library, past the dean's office. The office door was open. No one was at the desk. Karen Vale had retired a month ago, quietly, without a fuss. He'd written a single letter, to Count Aldrich. The letter contained 2 sentences. "I don't believe in his world, but I will no longer stand in his way." The desk was empty. A portrait of the Academy's founder hung on the wall, a mage in a golden robe, with a grand expression on his face, holding a crystal orb in his hand. Ethan looked at the portrait. He adjusted his glasses. He walked on. He stepped out onto the steps of the leafy spire. The same steps, the ones he'd walked down 2 years ago with his suitcase. This time, there was no suitcase. A carriage was waiting for him below. Lily was sitting in the carriage, eating an apple. Soyeon stood nearby, checking the horse's harness. Haley was reading a book. Emily was drinking coffee from a camping mug. Kira was sleeping on a bag of tools. Nora was mending the strap of her bag. Ren was carving a small wooden figure, a horse, for the blacksmith's daughter from Havenmark. Megan stood a little to the side, looking around, on guard, as always. Ethan walked down the steps. He sat down in the wagon. Lily handed him an apple. He took it, took a bite. Soyeon asked where he was going. He said, "Home." The wagon began to move. The steps of the leafy spire were left behind. Ahead lay the road, long, dusty, familiar. Havenmark, the workshop, the sign. Kane. Clocks, locks, strange questions. Orders were waiting for him at home. Broken locks, creaking doors, a new apprentice from Southmore, and a letter from G.A. Park, the icy mage with 88 heartbeats, who asked to be taken on as an apprentice, because she wants to understand exactly what she's doing when she casts spells. Ethan will read the letter in the evening. He'll reply in the morning. He'll write one word, "Come." And a week later, a little girl will approach the workshop gate, 6 years old, from the harbor slums, 2 pulses on the meter. She'll stand there, twisting the hem of her dress, and she'll whisper, asking if she too can learn like the older ones.
Ethan will crouch down. He'll look her in the eyes, and he'll say, "Listen, see this magnifying glass? It amplifies light tenfold. It has 0 pulses. I have 0 pulses. You have 2. Out of the 3 of us, you're the most magical. Come on in." The girl will start to cry. Lily outside the window will cry too. Soyeon will step out of the workshop and silently hug Ethan from behind, for the first time. Haley will set the lens aside and smile. Emily will mutter something rude and turn away to her test tubes, but her hands will be shaking. Megan, standing guard at the gate, will blow her nose loudly and say it's because of the dust. The little girl will wipe her eyes. She'll step over the workshop threshold,
And the world will become a little bigger, by one person, just as it had every day. Ever since that very morning when the boy with 0 pulses walked down the academy steps and set out to fix the world. Not with a sword, not with magic, with a workshop, with hard work, and with simple respect for people.